now it's recording. Ray Fisher, welcome to the show.
Hello. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me, LadyJenevia. I got to tell you, I'm a big fan. Keep doing what you do.
That blows my mind, honestly, because there's no way you remember this, but we've met before at a convention and, it was just the usual.
I'm fairly certain I do remember.
You do? You're just saying that to be nice.
I promise you, I'm fairly certain I do remember. I'm really good with faces. I'm a lot worse with names. And so when I saw you on LightCast, I was like, she looks real familiar and I don't know from where. Right. And usually my buddy that travels with me to conventions will be like, pretty sure we saw her at a convention at some point. And I was like, oh, yeah, I can see that. I can.
Yeah. When we were allowed to meet people and
and interact in person. Yeah.
I know, what a revolutionary concept.
Yeah. But, in those comic convention, those interactions are so quick. But like, I'm generally really good at remembering like the eyes and the like parts of the face that I'm just like, okay, yeah. I don't remember you. I think you might have been really, was it like me and Jason that you met? Did you meet us both?
We did a photo op, the three of us.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to say that you were the most nervous person I ever met during one of those things, but no, you were great.
No, I wasn't nervous. I don't get nervous.
Not at
Celebrities,
all.
No, celebrities are not intimidating at all.
Well, what's crazy is like sometimes people come into those situations and they'll just be like, yeah, both of you, come here. Right. And they'll just like grab you both. Other people will be like so skittish and so nervous. You kind of have to like take a second because, you don't want people to like blink or like be like this in the photo. Right. So like, it's cool. We're all people. We're just taking a photo. All right. Now just smile and we'll be good. It's just trippy seeing the different ways and people like react and respond. There are people who are like convention heads who are just like, I know what this is. What they walk in, walk out. It's like they walk in with the attitude like, oh, it was a pleasure for you to meet me. And I go, it certainly was. All right.
Yeah. Well, because we did the trio photo op and then, Jason's always got Real Deal Mata with him.
Yeah.
So I saw him as I'm leaving the two of you. And then I just look at him and I go, can we take a picture together? He's like, yeah, let's go. So we went out of the little photo op area and we took a photo out in the hallway or whatever. Yeah, it was funny.
Yeah.
I don't think he was expecting that.
Probably not, but I'm sure he enjoyed it.
So I was doing a bit of research into your origins as an actor, and you got into acting because of a high school teacher, one of your high school teachers in your sophomore year. And it said that you did Into the Woods.
Did Into the Woods, yeah. I ended up playing, they split the parts up in an interesting way. So I ended up playing both the wolf and one of three narrators, right? Normally the narrator and the old man are, counterparts, and the wolf and Cinderella's prince are counterparts. But, it's high school. You have to split things up a certain way and try to make sure everybody gets some shine in some capacity. That was really, that was really funny. It just took me back to my days where I was wearing that wolf costume and looking down and seeing, because, traditionally in Into the Woods, the wolf costume like has a full on like wolf situation down below, and it's a high school production. And so I guess the costumer that we borrowed this from, right? Because we're pretty close to Philly from where I grew up. And I guess they had borrowed some costume from somewhere, but like there's just like this huge patch just missing. And I was like, oh, he's wearing like weird underwear. And you're like, but there's nothing in the back. So what is this for? And then I actually saw the videos of how the production is normally run, and it's full on. I was like, oh, this wolf was neutered. Okay. All right.
Oh my God. That's so funny. Yeah. But it also said that you did musicals your remaining 2 years of high school, but it didn't say which musicals you did. So can you share that?
I can, yeah. So sophomore year, we did Into the Woods. Junior year, we did How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. And my senior year, we did Guys and Dolls. And that was the first time that I was able to play like a leading role in anything. And it was actually my high school history teacher. Shout out to John Murtha, DJ Murtha Daddy, who ended up casting me in that. And I got to play Sky Masterson in that. So yeah, that was that was the trajectory of the high school side. I did some more musicals, like once I left there, and then transitioned into just doing straight theater.
Because you also were in choir, so you're definitely a singer then.
I wouldn't consider myself to be a singer. I can hold a tune if it's basic enough, but it kind of went hand in hand when we were in high school, right? A lot of the folks who were a part of the musical were also in the choir, and they would double up, and we had the same. Our choir director was one of the accompanists for the musical, and so it just became like sort of the culture. And there were a lot of crossover folk, from both of that. And for me, it was like a sense of community within doing the artistic stuff that really that I resonated with. And so, it was funny and interesting too, because when I was growing up, my mom used to make me and my brothers like sing in the church choir, and I hated it. I'd be up there in the front of the church choir, was just like the worst little boy face on, right? At 8 years old, just singing. And my mom would look over, right? And she'd go, "Fix your face. Fix your face." And you go. So it's interesting how the thing that you're just like, yeah, I didn't really dig it at that point, you end up coming back into in some way. But you realize like, oh, well, you may have had like an affinity for the thing. You just kind of wanted to do it on your terms. Right. And that's right. I don't think that's ever really left me. Now, piano lessons was another thing she tried to get us to stick, and that didn't stick at all, like in any capacity. So I'm just not.
You didn't retain anything?
I'm not gifted in when it comes to instruments. Like, yeah. Well,
because my mom's a piano teacher, so I had no choice. But I'm better at piano than she is. So
okay, really,
I'm being antagonistic because she's going to watch this. So
okay, I think the next episode of the LightCast is going to have to be a piano off between LadyJenevia and her mother. We'll see.
But she's a better singer. Well, she's a classically trained singer, so okay. I was never like that. You know?
Can't touch it. Okay, gotcha.
We're talking like opera. You have to. You have to really train to do that, and I just never trained like that. So yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's like the only thing I wanted to do with my hands was like play video games. I didn't want to like do this. Right? It wasn't as stimulating for me. Anytime I would come across a song like Fairlice or something that I recognized from something else, I'd go, "Oh, I kind of know this. This is fun," right? But when it came to just like trying to go outside of what I knew with that, it just didn't stick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because you're very tall, I remember. So that means you probably have larger hands. And my mom and I, we get really jealous because all of the big composers, a lot of them are men. So their hands are a certain size so they can reach a 10th, and I can maybe reach a 9th. And I just get enraged by, how small my hands are.
Hand envy is a thing. It is a real thing. Now, I'm not sure how big my hands are compared to other people who are 6'3". I think my hands might be like relatively small for my size, but I don't know. Do you have to like compare it to your face? Like, how do you compare? Like,
well, whenever you're allowed to be at a piano, just see how far you can reach.
Okay, so what am I supposed to hit when I get my hands that way?
Well, an octave, you know what an octave is, right? So that's 8. Yeah. So one above that is 9, one above that is 10. So
I should be able to reach thumb to pinky.
Yeah.
10. Okay.
At least, yeah. I don't know how large your hands are. So
I will keep you posted. Like, yeah, I reached like 19. It was weird. Could you imagine?
That would be probably, I don't know, like Yao Ming or something like that status.
Shaq just over here, just tickling the ivories, like all of them at once.
Yeah. So another thing I read was, is it true that when you got into drama school, you had to shave your head?
Where'd you read that?
Listen, I am a pro at what I do.
You do your research. Who you been talking to? Andy tell you this? Who told you this?
It was on the internet, so I don't know any of your people. I was not involved in any of the emails to set this up. So
okay, yeah, no. When I graduated from high school and I took about a year off from school because I really wanted to figure out what I wanted to do. Right. I had an idea that I wanted to get involved in the arts, but I hadn't like fully committed at that point. And I was like, for me, I don't think I want to commit to like a 4-year a 4-year program. It just didn't feel like that was the path for me. And so my best friend, Andy, he and I made a bet because I told him I was auditioning for drama school, right? For acting conservatory. And, I ended up betting against myself, right? Because I was like, well, I might get in, I might not. And I remember he and I, he drove me to that audition, right? He went up there with me because we're from New Jersey, but South Jersey, maybe about an hour and a half from the city. And we sit up there, we're waiting up there, all day and even a little bit of the night because I wanted to make sure we got there like super early. And we had made a bet, and it was if I didn't get into the school, he would have to shave his head. And if I did get into the school, I would have to shave my head. And so ultimately, I got into the school and ended up with a baldy. And my friends from high school still have some really funny pictures of me with the shaved head. I literally look like a Ninja Turtle. Like, it's bad. I don't have the shape or the density or whatever it is for a bald head that I would need to pull off that look. So, but who knows? In the future, maybe. But, I've always had a habit of sort of downplaying, myself when it comes to that. And I figured either way, it's a win-win, right? I either get in or I get to see my buddy's head shaved. But he ended up going to the barber shop with me. It was him and another buddy, right? Because they wanted to make sure I cashed in, that, they got to cash in on the full glory of the embarrassing moment, right? And so I went in to the barber shop in my hometown and I told my normal barber. He was like, "Yeah, what are you getting today, Ray?" And mind you, Andy and I believe it was my buddy Corey, they were just sitting right there, like looking and kind of giggling. And, it's an odd thing for me to walk into the barber shop with people just like sitting there hanging out. And he's like, "What are you getting?" I said, "Yeah, can you shave it all off?" And he goes, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah, would you mind? Like, I lost a bet. And he goes, "Oh, word, you did?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I lost it for a good reason, though." So yeah, they really loved that. I'm surprised you dug that up. It's really funny. You just took me way back you took me around the corner of memory lane. It wasn't even down the street. It was like down and around.
Yeah. Well, I know that I had put some things into an outline so that you and your people could look over just to approve of what's okay to talk about. But I was going, but I'm going to keep some things to myself,
No, that's fine. Please.
It's not anything controversial. It's literally just a childhood story.
That's really funny though. And what's funny is I hadn't thought about that story in like a little bit too. So, yeah, I'm gonna call him after I get out of here and be like, "Yeah, you never guess what I talked about today."
Well, speaking of barber, I'm jumping around a little bit, but one of the things you've talked about, because you've been very vocal on Twitter about a number of things, was your barber, Wayne, that worked on you on Justice League. And that was one of the conditions that you really wanted his name to be put back into the credits. So have you talked to him at all now that it's been released?
Absolutely. And the thing is, Wayne, just to be clear, Wayne wasn't just my barber. He was the barber for the production in London. And one of the things was when we got out there, I asked folks on the hair team, I said, "Well, do you have anybody on staff who's got experience cutting people of color's hair and the barbering side of things?" And, they were really great. And they were like, "Actually, we don't. But if you find somebody, please let us know and we'll bring them on." So, I ended up meeting Wayne randomly at this barber shop as I was like scouting and trying to, find somebody who knew how to work specifically with like black hair with barbering. Right. And so they end up bringing him on and, everything's well and good. But there ends up being miscommunication. There ends up being some other issues that end up happening, and Wayne doesn't. And Wayne ultimately didn't receive credit for any of the work that he had done for myself or any of the other people, for the theatrical run of Justice League. And so, obviously, Zack being who he is, he's like, "Listen, absolutely, we'll give him credit for his work. He worked on the movie. Like, if there's anything else of, like, let me know and we'll go ahead and get it sorted." But, Wayne hit me up actually like last week when he finally was like getting information about it. He was like, "Yo, man, I haven't been able to watch it yet, but I've been hearing stories, man. People seem to really like it." they're talking about that haircut, man. I said, man, Wayne, you deserve it, man. I said, you put the work in. I said, I appreciate you coming in and doing this in the way that you did, because he's got a pretty successful barbering business out in the UK. And so, while it's nice to be able to work on a movie, that sort of thing, it's like, he's got other things that he needs to be taken care of. And so, he did us a pretty big favor. I was like, the least a person can do is have their work recognized by being able to say, hey, listen, my name was there. Like, I was there, right? And unfortunately, that leads into larger issues when it comes to hairstylists and people of color, hairstylists and makeup artists in the industry. And I'm glad those conversations are being talked about now, because it's something that I think is really important. And, anybody on a set will tell you, you ever want to get the temperature of like what's going on, you'll always find out what the environment, what the true status of a production is like when you're in the hair and makeup trailer, right? Because these are folks who have to deal with and navigate so many different people, so many different personalities, back to back to back. One day you might have to work on like 100 background folk. You might have to do this, do that. And so you really get a sense, like in talking to those folks who work on that end, like what's what, kind of like you would in a barbershop, I guess, when, or a hair salon, right? When you're going in and just chopping it up.
Well, I was glad that was something that you brought up, because it's a really recurring issue. Because I know that anybody who's vocal, like you're being vocal, is going to get a lot of pushback. But the thing is that this is a story that keeps coming up time and time again. There have been multiple Black actresses that have come out and said, yeah, on this really famous project that you've seen me in and you really loved seeing me in, I had to do my own hair because I was not being given a person that could do my hair. And in my mind, I'm going, okay, well, did you get paid a hairstylist salary on top of your acting salary? Because if not, then I don't think that's right.
It becomes a bit of an issue, and sometimes it's a clerical thing, right? People just not putting names down that they shouldn't put names down. Sometimes sometimes there are other things involved with that, right? All I can do is just come from it from a place of, all right, well, let's go ahead and just change it. Like, I don't want to try to assume what your motivation was behind crediting or not crediting some folks, but not others. But what we made sure that we did for Zack Snyder's Justice League is we made sure that we went back and anybody that worked in the hair and makeup department, especially folks of color who may not have been credited, because there were even some folks who were in the previous version, they were credited as uncredited on IMDb, right? There's a woman named Nora Robertson, a great makeup artist. In Zack Snyder's Justice League, she got credit for her work, her actual work, like in the film, right? It's just a weird thing. And some people say, well, it's a contract thing. Some people say it's this, it's that. But if I'm working on a movie, like personally, and I'm not sure what everybody else feels about it, but like being able to say you did it is just as good as money, if not better, right? Because it's experience, prove you were there, and it could lead to greater things. Because I have my own YouTube channel, and sometimes I make more in-depth video essays on there when I have time to do something more elaborate. And I did one on the craft, and there's a storyline in the craft that has to do with one of the main girls is Black, and she's getting bullied for racism and or because of racism. That was horrible grammar. Really sorry about that. I grammar sometimes correctly.
Yeah, well, and she, one of the things that the racist bully says to her is a comment about her hair. And so when I was going to write a video essay script about that, I wanted to make sure that I was doing my part. So I was going and researching academic articles about it to make sure that I was using the right language and all that. And there's a ton of information about this. It's not a secret. Yep. So it's astounding to me that it just keeps coming up. It's sort of like, okay, you're asking for the bad PR at this point if you're still continuing to have this happen time and time again, because this is not new. It happens everywhere, not just in show business. It's it's in the workplace, in schools. It takes 3 seconds to Google it and it comes right up. So I was glad that you said something about it.
Well, and the thing is, at the end of the day, they sent me to find a barber, right? And so by me asking someone, would they be willing to take time away from, already successful business to be a part of this process? It would have been crazy for me to not make sure that, or at least do my part to not make sure that their work was represented. You know what I mean? Like that just doesn't compute for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So going back, because again, I'm jumping all over the place.
We can jump all, listen, wherever we want to go. Let the road take us. So
jumping back to your earlier stages of your career, you did To Kill a Mockingbird. And I actually found a quote from an interview that you did that I think is really interesting, because you were talking about playing the character and kind of your thought process of this is what the character is thinking and feeling. But I think the quote also says a fair bit about you. So bear with me as I read this, because I think it's important to get all of this.
And before you start, how old was I when this
the piece is from February 2012.
2012. Oh, wow. 10 years ago. Oh, my gosh.
Almost, yeah. So it said, I tried to show his compassion. Here's a guy who's been in jail for 7 months for a crime he didn't commit. He's had everything taken away from him. He can't feed his wife. He can't feed his kids. Yet he doesn't badmouth anyone for what's happened to him. Partly it's because he can't. But I think that even when he's alone, he doesn't have bad thoughts about these people other than he's sorry for them. That's admirable. It's a quality I wish I could say I had. I know if this happened today, I'd have a lot to say. And I read that and I just went, I mean, he called it. He's, this is not a man who's going to sit idly by when something needs to be spoken on.
You literally just tripped me out. Wow. That's literally like reading an old letter that you like wrote to yourself from like a time capsule. That's crazy. Thank you for sharing that. And no, I absolutely. One of my big things has always been the way that people are treated, particularly where they work, right? Like I make it no secret, and I think everybody knows how you're treated in the place that you work, the place that you spend most of your time in, or an equal amount of time in, right? 8 hours a day. And the place that we generally, especially here in America, we identify ourselves as most, right? It's like, oh, what do you do? Well, who are you? Oh, I'm an actor. I'm Ray. I'm an actor. Such and such. I'm a doctor, or what have you. Like we identify ourselves by our occupation, and so for me, it's always been important insofar as like how people are treated where they work, because it affects you, and it affects your family, and it affects this, and it affects that, and it ripples out and has this crazy effect on just about everything we do. Because I'm fine, and I've always been fine generally to like go to work and grind and not have to, it's so long as the environment is cool, right? Sometimes you have terrible jobs, but the people at the job, right, end up making it worth it. Sometimes you have a great job, but the people at the job make you go, yeah, this really ain't the thing for me, right? So when it comes to that, I've always been pretty consistent in my approach with that. And with Tom Robinson especially, like there is a different level of compassion. There's a different level of humanity, but they're also in a different time, right? And they're in a time where people don't really speak up about those things. And the culture, especially the culture of where he was at in the South, people, you didn't really speak about a lot of folks didn't really speak about any of their trauma, right? You kind of just get the day. Whereas now people are willing to hear and talk about these things in a much more in-depth way. And so I'm grateful. Sometimes I feel like I was born in a wrong time period, but like I'm grateful that at the heart of it, I'm grateful that I'm here in this one, because I can't imagine with my 2021 brain what I would do or where I would be if I were in that position at that time. Because I don't even know.
It's also an interesting parallel because it's another character that's got a physical disability.
Yeah.
So it really does feel like it's come full circle in a way.
Yeah. And a character that has at the heart of it a good heart, and a person who does not allow the terrible circumstances of their life to warp or completely permanently change their perspective of the world. Right. And that's a pretty big thing. Like there's a lot of resilience that goes into that. And that is absolutely I think mirrored in the Victor Stone of it all, and the Cyborg of it all.
Mm.
Yeah. So we could talk parallels all day. I think we're on the same wavelength when it comes.
Yeah. Well, so you were on Moldiversity yesterday, and I almost screamed when you read off, or you recited a very specific quote from Twelfth Night. Be not afraid of greatness. Like as soon as you started going, I started not literally screaming because I was outside and I was going, I'm outside. I'm not trying to attract attention to myself. I have my glasses and my mask on. I'm trying to hide the fact that I'm Asian because I don't know who's around me. Listen, I'm not trying to bring down the mood. It's just the reality of the world we live in. But I got so excited because that's the quote from, not just because it's Twelfth Night and because it's Shakespeare, but because it's recited in She's the Man, because She's the Man is an adaptation of Twelfth Night.
Yes.
So at the end, Duke Orsino recites that to tell Amanda Bynes that she can play in the game. It was a real moment. But you're really into Shakespeare.
Yeah. That's where I've done most of my theater work, right? Working with the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, working with the Shakespeare Theater of New Jersey, and even in high school, right? We would do the musicals, but like for English class, we would read a different Shakespeare play every year, right? And I think freshman year was Romeo and Juliet. Sophomore was
my favorite.
Was it such your favorite?
Yeah. Oh my God. I cannot even control myself. The fact that I've had to wait an extra year for Steven Spielberg to do West Side Story, because West Side Story is like basically the superior adaptation, because it really, it's so much more clear in communicating what the play is actually about, because everybody thinks it's about young love, and I'm going, wrong. That's not what it's about. Yeah. It's so not at all what it's about. And so sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, please.
I'm too excited because I love Romeo and Juliet.
It's about the conflict and families not being able to move from their position to be able to come together. Yes, we did Romeo and Juliet. We read the Scottish play. We read Julius Caesar, and there was one more, and I can't remember what it was for senior year. There was another one, but Hamlet. We read Hamlet, yes, but that was sophomore year. Julius Caesar, I believe, was senior year. Anywho, I got a pretty decent memory when it comes to like timelines and things. But I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and Chris Terrio, I know, is as well. And when we would talk about some of these things, we'd be able to talk in like theater terms and some of the Shakespeare terms. So like when you have Aquaman saying, life is 1 or 0, it's to be or not to be, not both, right? The idea that he's able to just like off the cuff utter that phrase as if it's just like, hey, pass me a beer, right? It's like that's how I know that I'm like we're in good hands, right? So it's powerful stuff, and I think there's still a lot of power in the language and in the poetry of the words. And so I'm hoping one day in the near-ish future, we'll be able to, get engaged in some theater again and some Shakespeare again. I know Ray Porter's probably chomping at the bit. He and I would talk every now and then, and just listening to him on the phone, I'm like, man, I need to hear you do some like Shakespeare. Because funny enough, he and I were at the same theater company, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, right? He left the year before I got there. So like I got there, they're like, hey, do you know Ray Porter? You get out of the program, and they're like, yeah, I've never met this guy, but I keep hearing all this great stuff about him. And then finally we ended up meeting in like 2000, and we didn't even meet in the UK when he was doing all the Dark Side stuff. He and I didn't meet until 2000 and I want to say 19. He was doing Henry IV Part 1 and 2 with my buddy Rafi and with Joe Morton and with Tom Hanks, right, in this production. And that was the first time I met Ray. And, we were just chopping it up. He's like, yeah, man, I was in Justice League, but I hear tell they didn't use any of my stuff. And I was like, well, they didn't use a lot of stuff. And, let's sit here, have a drink, and talk all about it. Right? So there's that Shakespeare connection there. And there may be some other Shakespeare connections later on to talk about. But, between you, me, and the podcast right now.
Well, do you know that Joe was he was supposed to do Romeo and Juliet when he got the call to do Scandal, and he had to choose between the two, and then he chose Scandal, which I think was the right choice. Listen, and I say that as someone who adores Romeo and Juliet, but what he did on Scandal was just,
of course,
a cultural reset. So,
of course, and this was going to be a theater production of Romeo and Juliet as well. Yeah. So, I mean, it's tough because you do have to make those concessions sometimes, right? And I haven't been forced in the same way to make those kind of concessions, right? But for somebody as busy as Joe, like, I remember he was filming Justice League stuff, right? Even when we were coming into like the reshoot process, he was filming Justice League stuff. He had a one-man show that he was doing off Broadway and simultaneously doing stuff on Scandal, right? So he's just like buzzing around, boom, 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 boom. And I asked him, I'm like, how do you keep your head on straight? I was like, I'm exhausted just hearing about your itinerary. And he's like, well, it comes in waves. And when the wave comes, you kind of have to catch it, ride it. And then, because you never know where it's going to go. Mm-hmm. And I said, I can dig it. And to be able to see, Joe, the consummate professional, being able to like slay all of that, I was like, okay, yeah, I could probably do that too. Yeah. It's inspirational.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm going back to Romeo and Juliet again, but with the themes of Romeo and Juliet, kind of this idea that these people hate each other just because that's what they've been taught, because they've been raised in an environment where the norm is we're part of this group and we don't like that group. Mm-hmm. And there's never a reason given in the play. They just don't like each other.
There was some sort of indignity done upon someone at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of the subtext of the story, but they don't outright say this was what started all of this. So there's probably kids, especially like Romeo and Juliet are straight up children. So people are weird in like making that the main focus of the story, but whatever. But it kind of parallels in Zack Snyder's Justice League this revelation in Zack's version that the Amazons and Atlanteans don't like each other. Now they don't, even though they previously fought alongside each other, but somewhere over the course of
and even in the exposition of the history lesson, right? And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think it wasn't the same exposition in the theatrical version where Diana talks about the timeline for certain things, like the Amazons before their betrayal and its enslavement, right? Showing that there was a different lifestyle, there was just a difference in the world, and this thing brought people together, and then time and circumstances drove them apart again. And right, that's kind of like the back and forth, the ebb and flow. Like we're good, we're not good, we're good, we're not good. It's just a matter of how long, I guess, that beef or that feud lasts. No, that was something that I thought was really cool, because for something like this, when you're dealing with these different groups of people that have so much mythology and so much lore, like having that shared history between those two characters to like help tie certain things together or make you go, ooh, I could see that. I could see why, why they might be in some beef and why they wouldn't be able to piece things up is because they live so far from one another and they haven't talked about it. They haven't communicated about the problems. They're just sitting in this sort of perpetual place of just letting it ride out. And that oftentimes ends up allowing whatever the initial issue was, that allows that issue to sort of twist and maybe get magnified just through the storytelling. Like we just don't like them. We just don't like them. We just don't like them. And then have them both acknowledge at the graveyard that, look at what a crazy thing this is, that you have an Atlantean and a Themysciran sitting here. Like, this is pretty incredible. And this is probably something that hasn't happened like in a very, very long time. It's powerful without necessarily beating you over the head with like so much story, so much history, right? It's ingrained in it. And I think that's really resonates with me.
Yeah. Well, because it's interesting. So first Diana does the history lesson, but then we proceed to her working / flirting. Yes, I ship it. Leave me alone, internet. flirting with Bruce Wayne in the little layer where they're going through, okay, these are the people that we're trying to recruit into our
and she
team.
says we can't trust him.
Yeah, she says, I don't know if we can trust him. And that's when she mentions that they have had like the war between their two peoples previously. And so she says, I don't know if we can trust him. And I'm butchering the quotes because I have not watched it 11,000 times because it's 4 hours long. But basically, Bruce tells her, you know, you have to put that aside, which I love that moment, because when you follow the through line of Zack's DCEU, BVS is so much about fear of the other. Mm-hmm. And Bruce is just this straight up, you know, he's become this, he's not, it's not like anyone has straight up indoctrinated him, but he's just kind of succumbed to fear of the other because of his own traumas, because of what happened with, Zod attacking and he's witnessing, you know, that's the thing about fiction. Most fiction is just characters running around with unresolved trauma. Like that's always the driving force of most fiction.
And one of the biggest impetuses for me for that is the idea that his status, right, regardless of his trauma, his status was a certain place in his mind before Superman shows up. Right. Mm-hmm. Superman coming down and upending his idea about himself as being the most powerful or the richest or the most cunning or whatever. For a person who has isolated themselves for so long, like Bruce Wayne, to have a being come down and make you question everything about everything that you've ever known, that could be an unforgivable thing depending on who it is that you're dealing with. Right.
Yeah, because he's straight up, some of the things he says, you know, that if there's even a 1% chance that he's our enemy, then we have to treat it as an absolute certainty. And that's, we know what rhetoric that is resembling in the real world. Mm. So the fact that he learns at the end that isn't the way. And, you know, in Zack Snyder's Justice League, he's trying to make amends for that. And I think he even has a line that says something like, I'm trying to correct what I did wrong or something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love that in that moment, he's trying to teach her what he's had to learn through a lot of brutal violence, you know, in BVS. And it's just a really nice, like, now he's gotten to that position of leadership again, where now he's going to try to help the other members of the league. And in this instance, even though Diana is way smarter than him in a lot of ways, this is one moment where he can teach her something, which I thought was really nice and very Romeo and Juliet. Yep, I still ship it. So
ship it. Well, the thing you should look at, and part of my ringer going off here to have the Halloween theme ringtone you probably just heard. I promise you, I don't walk around with slasher ringtones on my phone all the time. It's just I got one for Halloween and I never changed it, and I think it's kind of funny. So, but also the idea of the transference of that information, right? Because you have that scene with Bruce where he's like, hey, you may have to like adjust in order for this to work, right? Adjust your mindset. Then she goes on to have that conversation with Victor where she tells him, hey, you may have to open up and, you know, in order to start healing. It's sort of like everybody helping in their own way. And if you track it, and I can't help but think that this was a purposefully sort of laid out thing on Chris's part, but like, you can track where the hope or the faith or the healing, you know, is throughout the piece. So
yeah. Well, there's plenty to get into with Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I'll continue to do that with you. But I also do want to ask about, you did a play, Fetch Clay, Make Man, about Muhammad Ali. And I would love to hear a bit about that experience of working on that, because you went through a physical transformation, and obviously this is such an iconic historical figure. So there's a lot that goes into playing that character. I'm sure you talked a lot about it when you were actually doing it, but it's been a while and not everyone is familiar with your origins. So I would love to hear more about that.
Sure. Fetch Clay Make Man was a piece written by a gentleman by the name of Will Power, really talented playwright, poet, just decent human being in general. And this piece centers around the relationship between Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit. Now, Stepin Fetchit was an old vaudeville actor and one of the most famous Black, probably back in the day, like that was probably one of the only names of a Black actor that people would know, right? And Stepin Fetchit was famous for this sort of more stereotypical performances, right? And what we would consider to be super offensive performances of Black folks at the time. And at the time, it was seen as comedy. But as things progressed, people look back on those films and went, that's really problematic. And he ultimately ended up becoming a pariah. Now, Muhammad Ali and Stepin Fetchit, there was a photo of these two gentlemen together. And the playwright Will Power was like, what is Muhammad Ali, this like man of the people, this person who is like the people's champ, right? Specifically for Black people. What is he doing in a photo with Stepin Fetchit? So you do a little research, you find out that they did have a relationship, and Stepin Fetchit actually knew Jack Johnson, the first Black heavyweight champion of the world. And so he created this piece around this sort of this historically fictional piece about their coming together and Ali needing Stepin Fetchit to teach him some of the old techniques that Jack Johnson may have passed down, right? And so for me, the transformation process was pretty wild because I'm a bit of a slimmer person. And in 2010, we did the production and I was playing a non-speaking ensemble role in the piece. And there were some folks on production. I was like, hey, listen, if this ever goes to New York, I want Huntress to do the role. And they're like, well, listen, you start training now, you might even be able to play it by the time it gets there. And so I was like, okay. So you started eating, doing all the push-ups, doing the running, like trying to get myself mentally and physically prepared for for what would have hopefully have been the transfer to New York. And so that took like 3 years. That was 3 years in the making of me literally sleeping, eating, lusting after this piece, right? And when it went to New York, I was afforded a chance to read for the play and ended up getting the call that they were like, hey, well, we'd want you to play the role if you're available. And I was like, you bet I'm available. And so it ended up being this like crazy process. But for the physical side of it, it was literally eating everything I could get my hands on, right? The training side, my boxing trainer, a gentleman by the name of Michael Elijah Day Jr., who was once a middleweight contender, and who actually still to this day, we work together via Zoom. We're in different places, but really dope dude. He helped get me like physically like prepared for what that is. A lot of the heavy lifting, weights and running and all that was all me on my free time because you're doing an off-Broadway show. You're making like $500 a week. So they don't really have like a huge budget, but the idea that you could be seen in this thing and it could lead to something greater, you make that concession. And so the research aspect of it was something that I really, really enjoyed because even knowing Muhammad Ali, seeing him in like, Nike or Gatorade commercials or whatever, like you say, oh, that's Muhammad Ali. Like I know who that is. Like you have that association, but in digging into who he was as a person, converting to the Nation of Islam rather during the time in which he did that, the way in which he handled the Vietnam draft, right? And Vietnam situation was a different time period than where Ali is at when he's young, but I wanted to sort of take a look at his life on the whole and sort of pick pieces that I could really just go ahead and like delve into, right? And so there was this idea in the play about masks, right? And people trying to transform themselves. And Muhammad Ali at the time in our piece, he had only recently come out as, he went from Cassius Clay and only recently came out as Muhammad Ali. And so having to try to make that switch publicly and to show the world, hey, listen, this is who I am now. This is how you need to identify me. And this is what it is that I stand for is a pretty big thing in convincing the world. And in some cases, convincing yourself that this is the right move. And so luckily, there's a lot of depth that Will Power had put into the piece. And all I had to do was just sort of dig in. And it was a great exploration of like, who's wearing masks, how they're wearing masks, and this idea of transformation, right? Stepin Fetchit, who was a pariah at the time, is trying to reinvent himself or reinvent himself as who he once was, who was Lincoln Perry. So it says a lot about these people as individuals, but it also says a lot about the Black experience in America. So yeah, I mean, I'll take up your whole podcast if we're going to start getting into all that. long answer long. It was an awesome experience. Not the easiest one physically, but definitely worth it. And yeah, hopefully, I like to gravitate toward things that require a certain sort of physical training, because I think that helps with like the conditioning of the mind and the process, right? And hopefully, we'll have more of that at some point.
And doing this play gifted you the opportunity to meet and have some conversations with Ang Lee.
Yes.
You want to share a bit about that?
I do, yeah, sure. So around that same time, Ang Lee was looking to do a 3D boxing movie about Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. And he had come and seen the play. And that ended up sending some shockwaves through, I guess, like the Hollywood hype engine of it all, because I hadn't had an agent or a manager up until that point. Everything else was like me, putting out me putting out headshots and resumes, or showing up at somebody's office going, "Hey, I'm here. I know you don't know me. Sorry if I'm offending you, but you got an audition I can do." Or reaching out to people via the interwebs, right? And so that was a pretty crazy process, but being able to meet and hang out with Ang for a bit was pretty dope. We actually went to a boxing gym. I forget the name of it, but we went to a boxing gym in Brooklyn to do some like test footage stuff. And, there was nothing ever set in stone about the role or what it was. But I was happy to just have that experience because he seemed like such a really down to earth dude. Right. And I remember us meeting at the office of the casting director, right? And we left from there to go to the boxing gym together, right? So it's me and Ang Lee just riding a train, right? And, nobody knows me from Adam. And so I'm like, but how are people not like swarming him? And he's like, I said, do people like bother you on the street? He's like, well, certain parts of town. He's like, certainly, he's like, if they're Taiwanese, he's like, forget about it. Like it's done. And so we ended up riding the train, doing this sort of like test boxing stuff and just kicking it. And, that's all there was. And that's all there needed to be. I was just happy to have that positive experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wasn't familiar with Step and Fetch It, but hearing you describe that conflict that he had to deal with between, I'm assuming the way you're describing it, it sounds like he was doing, would minstrel show be the correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So doing that, and then it's sort of what is the expression? You're stuck between a rock and a hard place so do you do the acting and play offensive roles, or do you just not act? Well, when you kind of are put in that position? Because that reminds me a lot of what happened with Sesue Hayakawa, who was this really famous, he was a Japanese actor during the silent film era. Okay. And he was sort of a big, actually probably the first real Asian heartthrob in Hollywood.
Okay.
But also he was really, people back in Japan were not a huge fan of him because he would play really offensive, villainous roles because that's all Hollywood would give him. We're talking about it, as bad as it is now, we're talking about the silent film era. Like, I think his most famous film, the name is escaping me because I didn't know I was going to be talking about him today. But I think it's now in public domain. That's how old it is, where no one even really owns it. It's just kind of, I think you can just look it up on YouTube. And so it's really, even today, it feels like a lot of BIPOC actors have to make that decision sometimes of, do you play the offensive role and get the credits and get the networking, or do you like go to sleep happy with yourself?
Yeah. Well, and the thing is with Step and Fetch It, he's actually a really smart, really savvy businessman, right? Outside of what he would do on the screen. And if you ever get a chance to like read up on him, like he was a bit of a shark when it came to like negotiating with folks, because he understood like his value even with what he was doing. And at the time, he had both white and black audiences alike that were laughing at and enjoying the work that he was doing. But ultimately, it was not helpful in the grand scheme of things because, you're living in an age where people aren't as aware of what that sort of representation does or the kind of things that sort of representation promotes. You're just thinking, oh, I'm watching a silly movie, right? But for me personally, like I'd rather not do anything than do something that I don't want to do, if that makes any sense. I, this job it can be very difficult at times. Mentally, it's a very difficult grind for folks who are out there trying to make it. I myself I've worked multiple day jobs simultaneously, and, I've literally done the starving artist thing. And so there's a point in time where I had to make a decision and say, well, listen, I'm fine having less on like the physical possession side, if necessary, so long as I get to do this kind of stuff that I actually want to do when I'm fortunate enough or blessed enough to actually engage in the business, right? And it's a tough conversation to have because, folks want to work, folks need to work. And for people of color, it's hard to start those kind of conversations with folks and let them know why certain things they may have in the script or why certain things that they're proposing may be offensive, right? And there's particularly in Hollywood, because it can be such a retaliatory business, right? And you say the one wrong thing to one wrong person, and they can like go ahead and smear you, and you wouldn't even know, right? So there's a system of like picking and choosing the battles. There's some folks who take the mindset of, well, you know what? I'll do what I got to do until I can do what I want to do. And that's, there's really no wrong. I don't think there's any wrong way. It's just a matter of what an individual feels comfortable with, because not everybody's going to want to contribute to the advancement of the BIPOC community as far as TV and film goes. Right. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't have to be everybody's concern. Not everybody has to take that in consideration. Some people are like, I thought it was funny, and I'm Black, or I thought it was this, and I'm that race, or whatever. But it's an individual thing that folks are going to have to, at the end of the day, ask themselves, did I contribute to, or did I hurt the conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So, I try not to let my opinion about where I think things should be. I try not to let that affect it. It's tough when you see so little representation of yourself in a positive way being represented in certain ways. But I think things are getting better for sure. But we just got to stay vigilant and make sure that they go where they need to.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you bring up that whole retaliatory dynamic that can happen when people are brave enough to speak up about what's right. We've seen that that's been happening to you, but also I remember when John Boyega had that speech that he made during a Black Lives Matter protest in, God, where was it? Was it in Trafalgar Square? Maybe it was like somewhere in the central London, I think. And, he said, I forget the exact wording, but it was something about I might be ruining my career, or I might not have a career after this, but I have to say this, or something to that effect. And you're just going, it shouldn't be like that. Not to be redundant, but it shouldn't be like that. Saying, please don't murder me for just existing. Like, that should not be a controversial statement. And the fact that he's genuinely worried about the repercussions of that for his career, when he's, one of the leading men of one of the biggest franchises that's been out in the last few years, it's, if the notion of anybody trying to deny that there's a problem,
yeah,
it's like, I have to question your ability to just have basic critical thinking skills, It's,
yeah, well, and the thing is, these problems, they aren't just specific to Hollywood.
Right.
That's the thing. The problem is that these things exist in every single place of employment that I think I've ever worked at, right? And I think the attitude that people take sometimes is they go, well, it's Hollywood, people pay you money, you should just go ahead and suck it up and deal with it. I've got to deal with this at my place of work. And I'm saying it's not right at any place of work. And I don't care what anybody wants to try to pay you. Like, you shouldn't have to go through that kind of thing, because at the end of the day, personally, like, I'm used to being broke. Like, that's what most of my life has been. I know if I ever have to go back to that place, I'll be fine. I got my friends, I got my family, got my video games, got my Zack Snyder Justice League. I got it all, right? So at the end of the day, I think for making sure folks understand that this is a problem across the board. People being able to speak out and be heard is an issue across the board. That's something that I'm really pushing for when it comes to this accountability being greater than entertainment. And the other side of that coin is, not even the other side of the coin, but one of the other issues is that folks in Hollywood, they will use the press, they will use media when it benefits them, and they will try to disparage or distract or do anything to anyone who uses the media or attempts to speak out and use the media in a way that they don't enjoy, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the sort of that's where that imbalance happens, right? Because there's not really there's not a system that is built to have these things be talked about and actually follow through on, right?
Right.
And as I've said in the past, like, the only thing that seems to have moved the needle in my case is my willingness to speak up publicly, right? Because I've got very little to gain, like very little, if anything,
and everything to lose.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Besides a good night's sleep, right? That's the only thing I got to gain when it comes to that. I've got nothing but support from my friends. I've got nothing but support from my family because they know that this is who I've always been. And if some of the folks on the other side had bothered to get to know me a little better, right, when some of this stuff was going down, they would understand that that this would never be anything that I would condone or allow to go down, right? So it can be a scary thing because you spend a lot of time, you spend a lot of energy, you spend a lot of effort in trying to get to a specific place. But for me, it's never been about perpetually staying in Hollywood, right? For me, I set goals. I say, hey, listen, this is what I want to do. Once I get that thing done, I'll figure out what I want to do next, right? Like, I love what I do. I love who I've been blessed to do it with. But if ultimately I'm not able to continue doing it in the way that I desire, then I'm fine to go ahead and see what the next adventure is going to be, right? Life's way too short. In 2020 in particular, for Black folks, it was coronavirus aside, right? It was a very, very, very telling year, right? It's one that definitely inspired a lot of where I was coming from in speaking up about this kind of stuff, because ultimately, looking at what impact I can have in the TV film space, looking at what impact I could have in the actual world, right? Talking about this stuff, like, it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer. I think, that's all I got. I can go on all day. But.
Well, when actors like yourself and John actually get out there and make statements like the ones that both of you have made, that honestly makes me want to watch your stuff more. And I want to make that clear and say that while we are recording and on the record, because I think some executive people who have high paying jobs in different areas of the entertainment industry, they like to run away from people that are willing to talk the way that you do or that John has. And for me, I'm going, no, that makes me, first of all, you're a great actor. He's a great actor. So let's just get that out of the way. But, the fact that you're willing to take that extra step of, I have this platform, I have a certain amount of privilege that comes with having some type of celebrity status, and this is what I'm going to use it for. That makes me want to support far more than, and even projects that you're doing, even if on premise alone, if it's something that I'm not necessarily drawn to, but if I hear, oh, John's in a thing, Ray's in a thing, I'm going, okay, I'm going to watch it because I like them and they're good people. So
I think I
want to put that out there.
Well, I appreciate you saying it, but I think we're at a place now where people in general want to be assured, and talking to some folks, they were like, you want to be assured that what they're watching, what they're consuming in every possible way has been ethically created, right? And, for me, you'll be hard pressed to find anybody to say that, Ray's difficult to work with. You will be extremely hard pressed. There seems to be this sort of way that business has been done for a very long time in Hollywood. And I'm clearly newer to what that is and not indebted to that old way of doing business or that old way of thinking. And so if people shy away from those who are willing to speak up about these things, people who have tried to take it through the proper channels and get these things addressed only to be met with pushback and sort of brushing under the rug. If ultimately those folks go, yeah, well, you can't really control what they're going to say. We can't really control what they're going to do. We can't really like bank on the idea that, if something goes down that they're not going to speak up about it publicly, then I'm fine not to work with those folks,
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the only thing you have as an actor is choice. That's literally it. You get to choose. You choose what projects you want to do. You choose who you work with by way of what those projects are, right? You choose that you make choices in your performance, and that's really it. So, it's I do not want anybody to be able to take away my power to choose when it comes to that kind of stuff. So,
yeah.
And one of the important things that I think kind of gets missed in this whole conversation is the idea that it's not a matter of this stuff being cancel culture, right? It's literally wanting things to change, wanting to address issues. And for some of us who may not have as much celebrity status, you're having to resort to going to Twitter. You're having to resort to doing whatever you can to try to push it out there, and hopefully people will respond and help add to your voice to be able to get something done. So it's been an interesting journey, I will say, especially over the last year. But I would not trade it for the world. I wouldn't trade it for the single world, because I tell you what, I feel blessed. I feel fortunate because people know and they see a lot more of the truth in the things that I've been saying, and they clearly can see a lot of the proof in the pudding with respect to the difference in what was done to the 2017 version of the film versus Zack Snyder's Justice League. And so whatever corporations want to do insofar as trying to protect current members or executives or whatever, I'm fine to meet that challenge and to keep talking about these things as openly as I possibly can, because I think that's ultimately what's going to rule out, right? I can come out, I can talk about this stuff. I can come on a podcast, talk about this stuff as easily as I would us talking about video games or Julius Caesar or Romeo and Juliet. I don't have to hide behind any sort of, I don't have to hide behind a PR team. I don't have to hide behind any of that other stuff. And the fact that I'm willing to speak about this stuff openly and publicly, I think, or I hope at least, adds some level of credibility publicly to what it is that's being said. Because ultimately, if you can't get true accountability, the least that I can do is try to make people aware so that they don't fall into the same issue with some of these folks that I found myself in. So, yeah.
It's interesting because you did an interview with Comic Book Debate, and you were asked just a question randomly in passing about if someone was going to direct a solo cyborg project, who would you want to direct it? And you said Rick Famuyiwa. Yeah. And I almost screamed that there was no follow-up to that, because first of all, I already had Rick in we need to talk about Rick as far as my bullet point in my head of stuff I wanted to talk about, because, and obviously there's no pressure on you. You can share as much or as little as you want about this, but I can't help but have some curiosity, because, so for those who are maybe newer to the ongoings of the DCEU stuff, especially if they're only just now getting on board because of Zack Snyder's Justice League, Rick Famuyiwa was supposed to do Ezra's solo Flash film back, I think it was supposed to come out in 2018 was the original plan. Mm-hmm. And there have been somebody made a giant Twitter thread of trying to pick quotes from different articles and cross-referencing everything and trying to put together their own theory as to what happened.
Yeah.
And it seems I'm saying it seems, I'm not claiming to know anything. Nobody come yell at me or send me a letter. Okay, I don't know.
As long as you got to make sure you preface it or qualify it.
It seems like there were creative differences, but more specifically that because Rick has a certain voice as a filmmaker, that he wanted to have something in his story that was speaking on issues related to the way Black people are treated, I guess, I don't know, in America or in the world in general, and that there was pushback from certain people that have not just been accused of racism by you, but other people, and that they just couldn't get on the same page. So he was just like, all right, I'm not dealing with this. I'm leaving. And also, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, But his solo Flash film that he was supposed to do with Ezra, I think you were supposed to appear in that. So I don't know if you can talk about this, but if there's anything that you would like to share about why you wanted to work with, or why you're open to wanting to work with Rick again, and anything that you're allowed to share or clarify about that situation.
Sure. About Rick's Flash, I don't really know too much about the behind the scenes stuff. Ultimately, as I understand, they just couldn't come together on what they wanted the story to, or what Rick wanted the story to be versus what the other folks may have wanted the story to be. I've never had a specific conversation about what that was. But I know one thing, Rick is a dope dude and he's a consummate professional. But also seeing that he's a person of integrity, and that if it's not the story that he's looking to tell, he's fine to say, hey, listen, this is just not where I want to be. No harm, no foul, but let's just go ahead and call it that. If that is the case, if that is what happened, then good on him. And so far as I'm aware, there's never been a version of the Flash film that did not have Cyborg present in it. And for Rick's part, I think his specific perspective would be great for Cyborg to really explore, and for us to explore Cyborg's solo film. Not just from like the action side, right? Because his stories actually have a lot of heart and they have a lot of meaning. And, Zack being the person that sort of brought us all together initially, like my initial thought is, okay, yeah, me and Zack, I'd work with Zack again in a heartbeat, right? Obviously, there's stuff going on at the studio, and other conditions would have to be right when it comes to that kind of thing. But just from what I know of Rick, I think he'd be a really solid choice, a really solid fit for it.
Yeah, because another thing was that he was the one who had originally chosen Kiersey to play Iris West, and Zack, I guess, had been like, "Oh yeah, all right, we'll put her in. We'll just have her as like a very open-ended introduction that doesn't really say anything too specific about her." So then Rick could have done whatever he wanted with the character.
Explore. Yeah. I can see that. Because I know Rick and Kiersey worked on Dope together, so I could see that connection. That, and Zack seems like the kind of person who would, even though he's sort of like building the template through what we're doing here with Batman, Superman, and Justice League, like giving people the room to explore their specific visions, right? And Zack has such a specific vision. Period. I don't think he'd ever want anybody to be like kind of stuck with what is something that he chose to do. And if he can give you input and help you flourish in whatever you're going to do, I'm sure he would do it in a heartbeat. So that is not surprising. And clearly she smashed it. So,
They were so good together. Listen, the fact that they could get me immediately shipping them when all they did was make prolonged eye contact with each other, I was going, oh no, I ship it. I need to see them together.
That's a testament to the folks in that scene. I can tell you, I was actually there for, I would be on set, and like every days I'd be training in the gym and I wouldn't have anything to shoot, but I'd like, after the training session, I'd go and be like, what are they shooting today? Where are they at? And so I was actually there the day they were doing some of the car crash stuff with Kiersey and Ezra. And I remember just like walking over there, like, hey, Ray, you're not shooting today, are you? I'm like, no, I just want to like watch. And I was just kind of like geeking out. That was a much more technical day. I think this was him like running into the street once he leaves the doggy daycare side of things. And them just being like, okay, now can you like just like grab the thing out of the air? And I'm like, what thing is that again? I'm like, oh, it's the hot dog. So just watching it, it's crazy. It still amazes me. And it will probably never not amaze me how they have to put this thing together sort of so technically, right? Mm-hmm. And I give the VFX team all praise when it comes to making sure that they get everything they need to make this stuff come alive, because I don't even know where you start planning it, let alone how you divvy out the tasks to be able to execute this kind of thing, especially with the Flash's powers, which are so damn cool in this movie. Like, can't even tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you and Ezra really get along so well, because there was that video the two of you where he pranked you back, and he was saying like, "Don't prank me because I'll do it on the last day."
Yeah.
And you're just laughing uncontrollably, which I was just going, "This is how all workplaces should be. This energy right here in this trailer."
Yeah, if possible. Yeah, and there are times where like you got to buckle down and do the work, right? But you know, Ezra and myself were like the youngest of the folks that were there, right? Working on the project. We're newer to it because, you know, Flash and Cyborg hadn't really been, you know, in it. And I think, you know, our energies are just, they're good complements to one another, just as human beings, right?
Yeah.
So it's we had a lot of fun, and I got a lot of really good memories just of like little moments of just like sitting around in the costumes, just waiting for stuff to happen, right?
Well, and I love the chemistry that you guys have as a cast, because I know that there's been a lot of unpleasantness that has now come out about the reshoots and everything. But I will say that when it comes to 2017, I loved seeing all of you on the press tour together, because there's that one interview where you and Ezra and Jason just start turning into a band, and Ben and Henry are just sitting there like, what is happening? And it's so chaotic, and it's like my favorite thing.
Well, the thing is, I didn't even know they were going to do that. I was like, I turned around, they were like, Jason, do you want to like, somebody was like, Jason, do you want to play something? And I was like, what is happening? And then I see Ezra get up and start doing something. I'm like, when in Rome. Right. That was, at least on my part, that was so impromptu. But it's one of those, it's one of those things, like we do have such different energies from one another, even amongst like the three of us, the more rowdier individuals. We have such different energy. And we know, like, you know when it's time to get to work, and you know when it's time to play, right? You're like, okay, got to give some space over here, some space over there, as in any work environment, right? But for the most part, I got to say, like, it's, when I tell people like this was like a great, probably beyond my expectation as far as an experience goes, like that's what it is. And all the excitement, all the joy, all the love on the press tour was something that was built through the principal photography process that we have with Zach and Debbie and the rest of the crew. So, you know, when you see us up there talking about those times, it's like, those are the things that we're likely just reminiscing on.
Yeah, I love that exchange that you and Ezra have in the film, where he's kind of asking, oh, do you think I have a shot with Diana? And then, because the funniest thing, I have to talk you through my whole thought process.
Go ahead, tell me, lay it on me.
I'm watching it for the first time, and your response, the first part of it is sort of like, Barry, she's 5,000 years old. So in my mind, I'm thinking that the next part of that is going to be, you don't have a chance with her. Like, she's the daughter of Zeus. Like, you do not have a chance. Like, give it up, you know? Yeah. But then the fact that the outcome of that sentence is everyone is a younger man to her. And I was so unprepared for Cyborg to make a joke, because he's been in so much pain this entire time. He's so just emotionally distressed. And the fact that Barry brought that out of him, I was going, I need more of this.
Yeah.
I need this.
It's that dry sense of humor too, where it's like, yeah, it's a joke, but also like, Barry, you're not even thinking about this logically. Like, that's a silly question to ask, just period, right? Like it hits a couple different layers when it comes to that. That's all Terrio right there. That's all Chris Terrio. And the amount of dignity that, even with the jokes, right? The amount of dignity that you give each character with it is just, that's the stuff that I gravitate toward. Like, I really do. And the fact of the matter is Vic, at that point, especially, like, he's not thinking about being in a relationship with anybody, right? He's probably thinking he'll never fall in love again, right? And so for him to be able to make that assessment in that sort of dry way, you know, I think it says a lot, especially because Barry isn't, maybe Barry isn't as aware of like everything else that's going on with Victor, right? And so, you know, he doesn't know whether or not he's even overstepping a bound by asking Victor something like that, right? But Victor doesn't take offense to it. He's not like, what do you mean, man? Why are you asking me? You know, it's not any of that. It's, you know, he leans in a little bit, and it's those little bits of like, or those little moments of the character being able to lean in and connect with folks even when you see back when Victor says, you know, it wanted to fly, flight is its nature. And Bruce says, yours too, right? Just like these little bits that like get through and allow these characters to like lean on one another in certain ways. That's for me, that's where the masterful sort of storytelling comes into play. Like it really pays off by the end because we've invested in everything. So
yeah.
But I will say that I had a great conversation with Andy Muschietti last year. The script as it stood and the things that we talked about at that time seemed really awesome. And I wish them the best. Yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to ask about, it's sort of been brought up in some other interviews, but not really in the way that I wanted to ask about it, is the scene where you're helping out a single mother. And specifically, it meant a lot to me. I'm going to try not to get emotional, but like I'm a very emotional person.
We can get emotional together. Let's go.
Well, she's Asian. So I'm like trying to take deep breaths right now because I interviewed her, by the way, and I interviewed the actress, C. Amanda Maud. She's on my channel. And yeah, it was a lot of fun because she has never had this amount of attention ever. So yeah, it was really important because it was basically a scene that existed in direct defiance of the model minority stereotype. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, can I just have a second? Because I'm like, do you have this where you get emotional and it starts to, you can feel like the kettle is rising and like
you try to take your time, but the more time you take, the faster it seems to come.
Yeah. Okay. I just need to like imagine Ezra's face on those pictures in your trailer to like bring me back.
It's tough that this happens with me anytime I start talking about Cyborg and like his relationship with his father, when I go into depth about it, because it does hit very closely for me. Right. And this idea of fairness, right? Because there's a lot in the world that is unfair. And just even in the current circumstance that I'm in, I'm like, well, you know, there are clearly things that are unfair. I think I believe them to be objectively unfair. But it's almost like sometimes this feeling of powerlessness to be able to affect any change with the unfair nature of the thing. Right.
Yeah.
And so, when you think about it, you're like, okay, well, it's sad because there's a possibility that those things may never change. Like, and you're not able to really ascertain like what the future holds about that. But I feel you. I definitely feel you. So yeah, take your time, whatever.
Well, because I was just wondering if when you were doing that scene, if it ever occurred to you that it's making a powerful statement about solidarity between the Asian and Black communities.
That did not occur to me during the filming process, no. But I can see where that would be a thing, right? I will say there was nothing haphazardly done about this production, right? Who each character was, the race of those characters, who sees who, and even down to certain people that the characters interact with, just like in passing, right? All this stuff was thought about and talked about, in some cases, talked about twice, just to make sure that the impact could be, just to make sure that, number one, we weren't portraying anything that would be offensive, but also giving truth to certain things that we see in everyday life, right? And I guess the best way I can describe it is Cyborg's experience as a Black man, right? Ultimately, we don't have to go and talk about Cyborg being a Black man in the film, right? Because people will see him and understand what that is. And you'll take that and you'll put it in the context of where we're at in the world right now. Making sure that certain pitfalls could be avoided with respect to representation. That's something that I've been really pushing for this entire time, because ultimately I'm very well aware that at the end of the day, regardless of whoever is doing whatever writing, whoever is doing whatever directing or whatever that is, at the end of the day, by me doing the work, I have signed off, I am complicit in what the work represents, right? And so making sure that I stay true to myself about what it is that I'm looking to do or not do, especially when it comes to dealing with people who are disabled and people in the Black community, and understanding that there's a much larger impact than some of the other folks on production may be aware of. And there's a much bigger implication with the way certain things are represented. That was important to me. And, Zach and Chris, it was just like it was almost like second nature. Like, oh yeah, no, I can see that, that definitely was, maybe this was or wasn't the intention or so on and so forth. But like, yeah, I can see that. And, you adjusted how you need to make a shift and you just move on about the day. It's like crisis averted. Right. And I know that is a more unique circumstance when it comes to these kinds of productions and these kinds of things that people are collaborating on. But being one of the only, if not the only, Black voice on the creative side of things, that makes it a little bit tougher because you don't want to be seen as it being like, here comes that guy again, but you also do have to be a guardian of both, yourself, right? Because at the end of the day, getting up there and doing whatever it is you choose to do, folks are going to look at you and go, well, regardless of what was written, you still performed it. And you knew, you had an awareness of it, right? And that I think that harkens back to the earlier part of our conversation about the step and fetch it of it all, right? And so it's interesting. I didn't even just think about that until in this moment, but yeah, no, there's nothing in this, I think, that has been haphazardly done, and things have been checked and double checked and triple checked. And there may be even meanings behind certain things and how things are written that, I wasn't even a part of the conversation about,
Yeah.
I'm glad that it resonated, and, it hits so differently, like all of this, for different people and for different reasons. Right. So thank you for sharing that. That's,
Well, because there was something that I went back and forth about whether or not I wanted to bring it up, because it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about right now. I know that there's certain things that you can't talk about. So if you feel like we can't get into it, that's fine. Sure. But I felt like it was my responsibility to say something specifically because there was an article that came out in Variety recently, and one of the quotes that was in it really offended me is like too light of a word. I don't have the right word for it, but it was a quote that you also specifically addressed when you responded on your Twitter. And it said, Walter, as in Walter Hamada, where it said, and that's nobody's going to pull this on me because like I'm Japanese. He's like, that's the pronunciation. So like, we're not doing this. Okay. So it said, Walter happens to be a person of color, so he knows what that feels like. And I just saw red when I read this quote, because the whole thing with the model minority stereotype is that I was reading into the history more of it because I thought that I might bring this up when talking to you. Is that so? The way that it's evolved and the history of it. One of the really ugly sides of the model minority stereotype and how people have weaponized it is that they're basically trying to use Asians in America to create a stereotype about us that is not true. That's point number one. And then they're using that to demean the Black community, the Latin community, to try to completely not take into account historical factors that have led those communities to be wherever they're at. So it made me really angry because on the one hand, it's like, you're not going to do that. You're not going to try to pit us against each other, because it's like, what decade are we living in? So that made me really angry. And another thing that made me angry about it is that another byproduct of the model minority stereotype is that it's basically used as a way to try to deny that racism even exists against Asian Americans. So after what happened in Atlanta, there are law enforcement and news outlets that won't even call it a hate crime. So I read that and I'm just like, you have no respect for our community. Either one, my community or your community. And I got really angry. So I just I felt like I had to say something, because I can't sit idly by and allow someone to try to weaponize a Japanese person's Japaneseness to try to deny the racism that that you have and continue to face, you know?
Yeah. It is attempting, I think, in certain ways to be framed as me speaking against the idea of ever having a Black Superman. What I'm saying is, let's not get distracted by the smokescreen tactic that's being used here to promote this thing to cover up for the actual real life racism that has occurred in the company, right? Because you've never once heard anybody in an official capacity deny that those conversations that I'm talking about happened. You never once heard them do that.
Yeah.
And what is happening now is folks are leaning on the investigator, because at the end of the day, they are aware that they will have plausible deniability. They can always go, well, the investigator didn't tell us. It's the investigator's fault, right?
Yeah.
They can do that and have that be the end all solution to their issue. And if you see how they're talking about things and how they talk around certain things and how they'll use, it becomes a semantic game. Right?
Yeah.
And if you're not apt or used to reading between the lines and seeing what people aren't saying, one of the big things is that, folks seem to be very, very, very adamant about telling people what wasn't substantiated in the Justice League investigation, but they're steering clear of telling anybody what was.
Yeah.
And if that isn't an indicator of some other things going on, then I don't really know what else to tell folks, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I knew it was going to be hard for me because I'm just a big baby and also because my thing is I'm a stress crier and I've just been perpetually stressed out for all of 2021 because this year has been a dumpster fire. I would say far more difficult than anything that happened in 2020 for me specific. It's really? Just too much happening too fast. Like of everything going on in the news. So, as soon as I read that very specific quote, not fight or flight, but I was just like, you're not going to do something that is playing into old timey, stereotypes of trying to pit the Asian and Black community together. We're not doing that. Yeah. And we're also not going to play into stereotypes that downplay the very nature of racism against Asians specifically, especially right after what happened in Atlanta, where I'm going, the fact that you would even think that this is appropriate for you to put out ever, especially now, it's like, I don't believe like all of these corporations have been I'm not honing in on one specific corporation here. Mm-hmm. All of these corporations have been saying, we condemn anti-Asian racism. Mm-hmm. Do you? Mm-hmm. Then let me talk to your Asian employees.
No.
Because I'm so tired of PR statements. Like if you're not gonna treat your employees properly, and if you're not gonna listen to them when they're saying this is happening, this is inappropriate, and or this is unacceptable for these 1, 2, 3 reasons or whatever, then like isn't there a My Fair Lady song? It's like, I'm so sick of words, like show me, it's that's the energy that I have now where I'm like, I'm done with PR statements. I want action. And if you're not going to deliver on that action, then like I have plenty of other things to do. Goodbye. Like
Well, and the thing is, I think for a lot of companies, it's a very popular thing to stand by the thing that is objectively, publicly wrong, like racism. It's another thing to actually address it and have to address it when it affects people who just so happen to work at your company and people who may be in positions of power at your company. And that's where the proof is either in the pudding or it's not, right? Yeah. So, for 2020, you've had tons of companies with Twitter feeds a mile long with, how they believe that people should be treated fairly and how Black Lives Matter and all of these things that are popular things to say at the time because, we all want to prove how not racist we are in certain ways. But, when it comes to actually getting into it and acknowledging so we can move on beyond it, that's a different beast. That's a different beast.
So I wanted to make sure that I went on the record and supported you as a Japanese person. Like I felt like I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't. So
thank you for that. I appreciate it. And the thing is, all I can do is just keep calling it out and keep calling it like I see it. And hopefully the things I'm saying even about the statements that are being put out there. Hopefully it rings true to people who are looking on, right? Because I don't think there's anything about my analysis of what that statement was in that situation that rings untrue to people. It's not anything different than what people weren't already, seeing, right? And what people thought for themselves. I mean, it's just a wild thing for a person to even assume that because someone is a person of color, that it automatically denotes that they would understand the plight of all people of color, right? There's
a reason why the acronym has expanded. It used to be POC and now it's BIPOC because there are so many things that are particular to, the Black community. And there are so many things that are particular to the Indigenous community that often get overlooked when it was just a POC acronym. And that's why it expanded. And I'm glad that it expanded because, it's like you can't, it's if you're just generalizing, but then if you're saying, oh, well, I'm against racism, but then you're still partaking in like anti-Blackness, or you're still partaking in, ignoring the plight of whatever Indigenous community in different parts of the world, then it's like, okay, but then you're not against racism. You're not like.
Yeah. Well, and I think for what I saw, at least in that statement, it seemed to be an attempt to sort of just kill a bunch of birds with a single stone, right? You just pull the Band-Aid off, tell people, hey, look, we're not coming back with the Snyderverse. We're not doing David Ayer's cut. We're not doing this and not doing that. And also there was no racism here. Walter didn't do anything to Ray. Walter's also a person of color. Like that's just silly, because the issue that I've made very clear that I experienced with Walter was not one based on race. This was based on his attempt to dissuade the Justice League investigation. And that is, to me, especially after the fact, and because it was something that Justice League reshoot process was something that he was not directly involved in. That's something that I find to be even more troubling, is that you'd be willing to try to dissuade something that had nothing to do with you, but it did have everything to do with Toby Emmerich, who's his boss. And, the corporate game, you end up having to protect the people above you and making sure that the people above take care of some of the people below that can keep them, up and running. And so it just becomes this weird corporate spider web. And so ultimately, I've never met Ann Sarnoff. Ann Sarnoff has never had a conversation with me. Ann Sarnoff has never called me to ask me about my conversation with Walter Hamada. The only person that they seem to have talked to when it comes to these statements that they're putting out is Walter Hamada, right? And I made it very clear that the conversation with Walter that I had, I've talked about on multiple occasions. I relayed that information to Warner Brothers HR back in July, before we even had the independent investigation. So this is where all this stuff for these folks, unfortunately, like my paper trail is very long about the things I've been saying, and my story has been very consistent. Yeah. And unfortunately for them, I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon. It doesn't take me anything to put out a tweet. You know what I mean? Like, I'm here, and if people are willing to listen and continue on, like I'm fine. I'll be okay. I think this is more important than anything I will do in front of the camera. It is. It just objectively, I think it is. So.
Yeah. I don't have a neat segue for this, but I did interview your movie mother, Karen Bryson.
Yeah.
Who's great. She's so fun. But I think I asked you this one of the times that you were on Instagram Live, and you talked a bit about this, but your Instagram Lives don't stay up. So it's gone and disappeared into the night. So I wanted to get you, while you're here, to share that story that you told about meeting her for the first time and having that nice long hug.
Yeah. So what were we shooting the first time Karen and I shot? I think we were actually doing the car scene. All right. And I think I walked into like the studio, the sound stage, and I think Zach or somebody was like, oh yeah, your mom's here. And I'm like, where's she at? And so there's like this little pop-up inside the sound stage, right? And like everybody gets their little pop-up tent that they just hang out in between takes or whatever, right? If you need to change, there's some privacy there. And so, as I'm walking by, I see like, if you want people to be able to like talk to you, you kind of like leave the thing drawn. And so I kind of like faux knock on the tent, and I go, Mom? And so she goes, "Oh my gosh, how are you?" And I remember seeing her, just being like, "You are gorgeous, like you're lovely." And we ended up just like hugging, and we hit it off like gangbusters, like pretty quickly. So technically, I don't think, this is Hollywood stuff, but technically Karen's not even old enough to be my mom, I don't think.
That's very Hollywood.
Yeah, very Hollywood. It's not because I'm too old, it's because she's too young. You know what I mean? Like I was, 28 playing a, 20-year-old, or attempting to play a 20 to 21-year-old. So ultimately, like she ended up just becoming like a really good friend, right? We talked about some of the stuff in the script, because sometimes they don't let you read the entire script. And so she was like, "Hey, quick question." She's like, "I got some of the pages, I got some of the context to everything." And, I was just running her through like the paces, right? And just being, not running her through the paces, but like running her through the pages and things, and just being like, "Oh, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this." And, you let her tell it. She'll say, she's like, "I could see by the way you were lighting up when you were talking about it, like this was like something that you were really going to, put everything into." And so whenever I'm in London, we'll get together. I mean, she and I talk maybe once a month or so. Like we'll text a little bit, and then like hop on an audio call and chat for a couple hours. And definitely one of like, she's got some of the best energy of a person that you could ever meet. It's almost like nonstop, right? And it's just good, man. Unflappable, I guess the name that unflappable would be the word that I would say to describe her. And just fierce, really. And
yeah.
What an actor that can pull so much out of, the bits and pieces that we had there, right? I mean, she put a lot into a very short amount of time, but it ended up, I think, working beyond expectation in people's ability to sort of connect to her, which allowed them to connect to Victor, which allowed them to connect to the situation, and ultimately just added so much color to the story. So yeah,
because I wrote down one of the quotes that she had said in the interview that I did with her, where she said, talking about you, she said, "He is one of the most talented actors I've ever had the pleasure of working with."
No, she flatters me so. She flatters me so. Yeah, no, I remember just being like, "Yeah, you're like," I think I said like gorgeous or vivacious or something like that. It was just like this energy she had about her, right? And she'll tell me to this day, she'll be like, I was terrified because I thought you were going to be one of those like Hollywood people that just was like, "Don't talk to me. Like, I'll be in my trailer, you'll be in your space. Like, don't bother me." But like, that's not my style. So
yeah, very clearly not your style at all. I love that scene though, in the car before we know what happens, but where he's so emotional, and she's just, I think she puts like the hand on the face, and she's just comforting her son. It's so oh god, it's just so emotional and beautiful, and it's everything. Like,
well, she turns his face toward her, right? Like,
yes,
he's looking out the window trying to hide his tears, right? And then she goes, "Hey, hey, hey," and she faces him toward her. I mean, it's a powerful gesture. It actually makes me a little emotional just thinking about it, because
I did it. Now it's your turn. So
I mean, I've definitely had those situations, talking to my mom, where things of like, they just upset you so much, right? And having that, especially for Victor, right? Having that individual who gets it and is willing to try to help and engage in the situation emotionally, which is ultimately what he's missing on his father's end, right? It's just in that engagement period in certain ways. But the idea that, she turns his face toward him, she goes, "Hey, hey, hey, hey," and turns his face that way, right? It almost speaks to the idea of like, hey, don't hide who you are. Don't hide this emotion. Don't hide all that. Like, let's face the day. Let's face the problem, and let's talk about it, And that, I don't know if that was her intention in that moment, but like, it just works, it just manifested into that. So, Yeah, no, Karen's a special lady, and I think that relationship, that scene, is super special. And certain folks have, they've said, thank you for showing or attempting to show a little bit more of a vulnerable side to, a black a masculine black character, right? And for me, I'm like, well, you've got a person who is the captain of the football team, right? He's a quarterback. By anyone else's account, he probably has it all. They're like, he's smart. He's got everything going on physically with the football side of things. He's probably going to a great school after this. He's going to be great. His parents are geniuses. They're well off enough, right? But you don't see the pain that this person is hiding, right? You don't get to see that other side of it, the stuff that goes on at home. And so like it hits for a lot of different reasons. And a lot of that I recognize from my own experience. So the fact that it has resonated with folks in different bits and pieces, because some people will say, oh, it's that moment where he's in the car. Some folks will say, oh, it's that moment where the camera pans down from, Karen being in the stands and it being an empty chair. It's just a lot. It's just a lot. But it's masterful storytelling because you get exactly where this person's coming from. And at that point, you're on his team. You want him to succeed. And, Victor could have easily gone the other way and become a supervillain. And people would have been like, I can see that. Understandable. But, that's not who he is and who he truly is and who his mother raised him to be. Ultimately ends up winning out. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of interesting that both of your movie parents, in a way, it feels like they could actually be your parents, just the way that all of you are as people, because Karen is so vibrant and energetic. And I think you're the same way. And Joe is so smart and thoughtful. And honestly, what's quite interesting about Joe is so the guys have been trying to get Joe to come on to LightCast for a while now. So for so long that, because he wasn't able to make it for a number of different reasons. He's very busy, He has told a lot of stories about some very unethical things to do with racism that he's encountered because his career spans several decades. Yeah. And it's not like he's been particularly quiet about these things. He's been very, oh yeah, this happened on this gig and this happened on this gig and pick a decade that I've worked and, I'll have a story, Yep. And it's quite interesting, I think maybe because we're in the age of social media that the things that you've talked about have become so much more amplified, but Joe has stories. I don't know, did he tell you about the Sanford and Son thing or are you familiar with that?
Did he tell me about the Sanford and Son thing? I don't think so.
This was a sitcom that he was on in the 70s.
Yeah.
And he found out from just watching, the show and other shows that were on television. He found out that the scripts that the show was being given, it was a black sitcom, that they were just regurgitated old white scripts from that already existed, which I don't think legally you could do now because of the guilds and whatever. Yeah. But they just they didn't bother to actually write new material for this black sitcom. They just basically set it up to fail.
Yeah, and I'm just Sanford and Son the show, but I didn't know Joe was on it at all. That's pretty wild. You're tripping me out.
Yeah. So when he said that, I was going, God, and it on the one hand, it's such a horrifying story, but then on the other hand, I'm going, but has it changed that much? Has the industry changed that much?
And that's the thing, you got a lot of folks in this business, and I thank my lucky stars for everybody who's paved the way, right, for people to be able to speak up about the things that they're speaking up about now, because you got a lot of folks, a lot of journey people, actors and actresses that are that essentially, they had to deal with stuff in their own way at a time where that was not the popular or right thing to do. I've received a lot of support from my colleagues in the Black community, actors and people in the industry, saying, for lack of a better term, keep going and thank you. And if nothing else, that little bit alone. And I'm talking some folks I've never met before. What I mean? I'd never expect any of this stuff to sort of transpire or to linger on for as long as it has. But I've had people tell me, listen, we understand what it's like in the business, and we know for what it takes for a person in our position to speak up. they're not just blowing smoke, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's wild. I was talking to somebody and they told me, they were like, older actor. And they were like, I've been blacklisted twice. And I go, really? They're like, yeah. You're like, yeah. I said, well, do you know who it was? Like what the deal was? He said, I know who one of them was, but he said, ultimately, I just outlasted him.
Right.
He's like, I just outlasted him. And that's, to me, that was super inspiring because it's this, for a lot of reasons, this experience, right? This moment that I found myself in this thing that I found myself in over the last year. I mean, this is, I think, a pretty big thing for me as far as like my life and defining moments, but it will not be the ultimate defining moment for me. You know what I mean? Like there will be a time after, and I'm happy to outlast this experience, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it's also interesting because we talked earlier about the whole issue surrounding black hair, and Joe has a black hair story that he told about. He was on did he tell you this about being on House? He did an episode.
He was all the stories. Come tell me.
I'm like, this is your show, Dad. But no, he was appearing. I believe it was just one episode of House that he did a guest appearance on. And I don't know the name of the hairstyle. I don't think it's said in whatever article I read or whatever, but he had some type of black hairstyle. I think they used the word short knots, but I don't remember. So nobody yell at me like I don't remember what it was, but it was some type of traditional black hairstyle. And basically it was a lot of back and forth where the network just really didn't like it. They didn't want him to have that hairstyle. And he was really fighting for it. But eventually he was just like, I guess maybe that it just wasn't worth the headache of the fight. So he cut his hair. And I'm just going, really? That's Joe Morton. He's a legend. Like, if he wants to have a hairstyle, let him have the hairstyle.
He might have had this was how he was naturally wearing his hair in real life.
I think so. I think
it might have been twists. I remember seeing photos of Joe. He had some twists. But no, it's pretty wild. It's kind of crazy, and having to pick and choose those battles. I mean, that's just another layer of what it already can be a very stressful situation trying to make something happen in this business. But, it's, thank God the conversations are shifting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, incrementally, but I also think that the industry, my impression of it as someone who has never been a movie star, so I wouldn't know, but it seems like the industry can be pretty fickle, even if you're not blowing the whistle on racism, because I forget exactly which studio it was. Maybe it was Fox, but I might be misremembering. But somebody blacklisted Keanu Reeves for decades because he wouldn't do Speed 2. So if Keanu Reeves can get that kind of backlash, then what hope does anyone else have?
I mean, and that's the thing. It's like you're dealing with a business that I think anybody who's read any movie news or any movie history, I don't think anybody will be able to deny like the systematic racism that exists within Hollywood, or the systemic racism that exists within Hollywood. And so like it's one thing to hear about it and go, okay, well, that shouldn't happen. But it's another thing for people to be like, well, I actually just don't feel like talking about it right now. Like I'd rather just be able to watch my content in this moment. I don't want to have to think about anything political when it comes to that. But it's like, this stuff, it needs to be talked about. It needs to be dealt with, so we don't have to continue to talk about the stuff and to deal with the stuff as things progress. So it's tough. I don't know anything about the Keanu Reeves blacklisting,
but they were just mad that he wouldn't do Speed 2. They offered him a lot of money and he just didn't want to do it, so he didn't do it.
What's crazy is like oftentimes people think, and this is one of the things about the business, and at least from what I understand, people think that you getting blacklisted is somebody going, you'll never work in this town again, right? And just doing this whole dramatic show. And unfortunately, that's not the case, right? There's a much more sort of like behind the scenes conversation kind of deal that goes on, which ultimately, ends up contributing to what it means to be blacklisted in this business. And, it's tough because oftentimes folks, when things happen in that way, it's easier to pretend like it doesn't, right? It's almost kind of like the idea of of someone who's not racist overtly, calling you all types of slurs or whatever it is, but will instead just, discriminate against you silently, and you never know what the impetus for that situation is, unless they were to tell you. That's the stuff that gets a little scarier and a little bit more insidious. But folks know that they have to shift, and I think the folks who are used to the old way of doing things will continue to find ways to pivot and to do what they do, but in a more low-key way. But I think for the actual way that the world and that the business is going, I think for the most part, the people coming up genuinely and legitimately want the industry to change, right? And want the industry to be more inclusive, and want the idea that, oh, well, you and this person didn't get along, that shouldn't ruin your entire career, right? Or whatever that is. Those things will change. The dynamic will change. It's going to be a while before it, is fully realized, but we gonna keep pushing.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because the fandom kind of seemed to, I don't know if appropriate would be the right word, but they took the whole Us United thing as a hashtag to try to make it about uniting the fandom. But to be quite honest, watching Zack Snyder's Justice League in its finished form and hearing that line, I think Ben is the one who says the line, and it's just, you can really tell that that's why I like Zack's films, is that he's always taught, especially, for the last decade or so, all of his films are getting into kind of socio-political issues. And you can tell that that's what the film is really about, because the whole Justice League, they're such different people and they come from different backgrounds. And it's a more extreme version of that, because obviously Themyscira is not a real place and Atlantis is not, these are fictional places and these larger than life characters. But it is that it's basically being like, hey, everybody, stop being racist and sexist and all of the isms. Let's just throw those out and let's all come together. Because I think that was kind of how I interpreted the story and the whole battle that they're fighting, is that, so you have, just a select group of megalomaniacs that want power at any cost, and they don't care who gets harmed in that process. And the direct parallels to how that resembles real life. It's always like there's a few megalomaniacs who want power at any cost, and the only way to stop them is for everybody from all different groups and backgrounds and walks of life to come together to be Us United. And so I'm going, for anybody who's watching it and thinking like, oh, it's not as political as BVS was, I'm going, it is. It is.
Well, and the crazy thing is, our politics are bred from who we are as individuals, right? It's bred from this place. You can always break things back down into like emotion, right? Into humanity. And I think this film, Zack Snyder's Justice League, is more about, I guess, our version or idea of humanity, which in a lot of ways is political, right? We do not agree on how one another should live in a lot of ways, right? You see that represented in the Atlanteans versus Themyscirans versus men versus, there's so much to it. I think what people are looking for, well, if you're looking for it to be similar to Batman Superman Superman has more of a pinpoint laser focus, whereas this is much more up to interpretation for how human beings live, right? Or for how humanity is represented and how we work together to accomplish a goal, or how we don't work together to accomplish a goal. Because you could literally say, well, Batman's attempting to start a unionizing effort amongst, like we could go and take it to those places if you want to go there, right? It's just, I think there's a lot more to it. I think this film is less about political intelligence as it is about emotional intelligence, and so it's different. But I think it one fuels the other. If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, because I know that you've gotten a lot of attention for saying that certain isms were happening in certain situations, particularly, as a Black man, you're speaking a lot about racism. But for me, just as a viewer watching these two different versions, the fact that entire Amazon section was cut that's sexism. Like, what are you even talking about? Like, trying to deny the existence of isms. There's clearly isms at work here, because there is no excuse to cut that sequence, which was so cool. Oh my God. It was the cool. Oh my God. When Connie's just like, Amazons, show them your fear. And then they just scream, we have no fear. I was like, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to fight someone right now. Like, let's go. Let's go. But that's how Zack is, you know, I mean, coincidentally, today is the 10-year anniversary of the release of Sucker Punch, which I will defend until my last breath, where I'm so insistent that more people need to reevaluate Sucker Punch the way they reevaluated Jennifer's Body, because that was a Me Too film before the Me Too movement happened.
Gotcha.
And so it's like, you can see that he champions women and you cut it out. You cut it out. Like, that, how could you cut? I mean, how did you feel watching the Amazons? Because they were, honestly, I got my life.
I didn't even realize that we had that much footage of it. I saw actually got to see the scene where they're like, you know, jumping on Steppenwolf to stop him from getting the box. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's like this big green just mass of block. And they're like, all right, so you guys just gonna like jump on it and like, you know, try to pull it back from this place. And just watching them like try to work this out with something that's clearly not, clearly not there, was pretty wild. But to see people represented in powerful ways, right? It almost feels like, I don't know. It's crazy. It almost the sort of coming together. The idea that you have the Amazons who are like, yeah, no, we're ready to die for this. I've never seen a movie where you have that many people, especially like that many women in a warrior context, being like, yeah, it's time to go down with the ship. You know what I mean? Like, let's go.
God, that scene was amazing though, because you have this sinking dread of, oh my God, so many of them just lost their lives trying to fight for this thing. And then that it completely takes a turn where you have just, I don't know how many thousands of them just riding, like, we ride at dawn and it's dawn now, let's go.
Gather the legions. Yeah, it's like, no, you got a whole nother problem to deal with, man. Yeah. And yeah, it's just, it's tough to me that it's tough for me to understand why folks would not think that is an entertaining or like a thing that people would want to see, right? Yeah. Like for me, it's about learning about the different cultures and seeing how things work. Like I'm interested in Atlantis and the politics down there. I'm interested in the politics of Themyscira, right? Yeah, and even you want to talk about, you know, Batman, Superman, and the political aspect of it. It's like, yeah, the idea of a treaty, the idea of truces, the idea of like, you know, nations working together in order to, you know, stop a global threat. You could equate that to, you know, Paris Climate Accord. You know, you could equate that to, you know, all these other things that involve people coming together rather than driving people apart. And maybe that's something that people maybe aren't resonating with. It's like, oh, I don't know what side to pick. You know, there's not really like there seems to be a more objective good and evil to this, as opposed to like being able to think around it in a couple different ways, which you know, for anybody that believes that, you know, that's a simple thing, getting people to work together is a simple or uncomplicated or non-political issue. You know, good luck. Yeah. we need you in the government, because if you can get that stuff solved, go ahead, please help us.
You mentioned Batman. I love that moment where he introduces the League to Alfred and he goes, "This is Alfred. I work for him."
Yeah. Yep.
Character growth. Yep. I love character growth.
Yep. And that's that playful banter that they have as well. The idea that Alfred, you know, says if he's like, if I had $1 every time, he's like, yeah, it'd make it even more insufferable. Right. It's like taking that dynamic of what a butler, you know, should be and flipping it on its head. Because Alfred's just like, hey, listen, man, I've been to war. I've had to deal with you my whole life. And, you know, it's not him. It's not Alfred sort of repressing or suppressing who he is. It's him evolving and being like, yeah, he can be just as jaded as Bruce is, right? He's had to evolve and adapt to be able to deal with him on a day-to-day basis, right? And you know, Alfred's power within this film, like I love Jeremy Irons. He's just dope.
Did you get to interact with him much?
Oh yeah. You know, for that scene in particular, there was also some stuff like during the reshoot process, but also like, you know, it's looking at this movie because I didn't know that they shot that Wonder Woman sequence where he's trying to, you know, he's basically
teaching her how to make tea.
Teaching Diana how to make tea. I said, it's such a smart thing to do because Wonder Woman, being 5,000 years old, has probably made hundreds, thousands of cups of tea, right, over her course of being alive. But the idea that just because you've been around a long time doesn't mean you know how to do something perfectly or better than or whatever. Like that's something that I don't think I'll ever get over, right? And the fact that Alfred isn't afraid to engage with these powerful people in the same way that he's willing to engage with Bruce or whomever else that he deals with, right? It's like the most powerful being just walked into your Batcave, and she low key accuses Batman of plagiarizing her equipment, right? Which is another really fun thing. And they're just having this banter as if they've been friends long enough, right? It's just crazy. Same thing with Superman when he walks in. Alfred has this sort of shock because, clearly he was obviously he knows that Superman has been brought back to life, and he has been surprised by Bruce being right that Superman would come, right? And what's weird is it almost feels like this sort of role reversal in a certain way, right? Where Bruce in the last movie was like, "Hey man, we got to go deal with these issues. We got to deal with these problems." And Alfred's like, "Well, we should actually not. We should have faith. He's not your enemy." And in this film, it kind of flips a little bit. Alfred's more the naysayer, and Bruce is like, "No, I'm working on faith, man. I'm working on faith. First time in my life, I'm working strictly off faith." And Alfred's like, "I don't know. Don't go waving the red cape if you can't. If you can't stop the charging bull or something like that." I can't remember the exact line. So just to see that dynamic shift between the movies too, it's like there's a lot. And I'm rambling now, so feel free to chop and screw that.
No, it's good. And I mean, it's also just, I think it's an interesting group dynamic, this ensemble, because a lot of the people that are the main players of the league as actors in your career, it's sort of like you were at a certain level of established, and then you had this huge jolt from getting cast into these roles, with the exception of Ben, who was already an A-lister. So how is he to work with? I know that's such a stupid question. I hate when reporters ask that, but I just think it's an interesting dynamic where he's the clear, he's been I cannot remember a time in my life being alive that Ben Affleck was not already an A-lister as like the Hollywood status, the status quo. Yeah. But, it seems like he's really down to earth. There was, I think Zack said in an interview or something where, about the reshoots where he kind of called Ben up like, "Hey, I don't know if you're busy, but we're doing some additional photography," which you were involved with too. And Ben was like, "I'll do it because it's you," which I love. I love that.
Well, and the thing is, you're not going to get that kind of response probably from everybody. I think it being Zack creates a special dynamic. I can't think of anybody who wouldn't pick up the phone if Zack called and was like, "Hey, I want to do this thing. Would you mind helping?"
Yeah.
I can't imagine somebody just being like, "Yeah, nah, sorry, bro." Ultimately, the entire cast and crew, I got to say, because people ask well, who's your favorite to work with? How fun was it?
Okay, that's a stupid question. I would never ask you that.
Exactly, yeah. But everybody's sensibilities are so different, right? Like Ben, especially when he's in the cowl and getting stuff done, he takes on this other persona. Partially because the suit is just uncomfortable in general, right? But the other part of it is just trying to keep into the Batman side of it, right? And one of the interesting things to watch is because Ben is a director, he does his own thing. Seeing the level of respect that he treats Zack with, because this is Zack's movie, not Ben's movie, right? Being able to see him switch that hat and be like, "All right, what are we doing?" And they have a shorthand lingo because they understand from the director's side what everything is, but he's not in there trying to run the show or be like, "Well, I would direct it like this and not that." He's very respectful of what that is. So that was something that was really, really cool to watch.
Yeah. Well, I think that I know that he had a lot of, I think this happens every time they cast a new Batman where people were just going, "No, he's terrible. Why is he Batman?" But honestly, I have never loved Batman more than when Ben has played Batman. Yeah. Just like I have never loved Superman more than when Henry has played Superman.
There you go.
which is incredible. It's great writing, and it's also they're just great at playing the characters.
Yeah. Well, my thing is too, like, these characters, they're ours for a moment in time, and then they'll go to somebody else and go to somebody else, go to somebody else. Like, I grew up with Michael Keaton. That was my Batman growing up. And so, but I do leave myself, and I hope the world leaves themselves open for future interpretations of the characters. Because, one of the great things that Zack has been trying to do is just sort of evolve the conversation around these heroes and about these characters, not just the actor playing them, but like the actual emotional life of the character and the actual just the trajectory of where these characters can go. And sometimes people get stuck in, whatever their interpretation of the character is from previous associations, right? Be it, the comics or cartoons or what have you. But that flexibility and just staying open to it is, I think, something that's really helpful because, Ben is my Batman, right? Like, he's a great Batman, and he's a Batman I got to work with. So how could he not be? But, I'm also looking forward to seeing what, the Robert Pattinson Batman is about, because it's a completely different thing. And so, I think just leaving space to be surprised and to let other folks just show you what they got before you make a judgment I think is pretty important.
Yeah. Well, and I also love that the first moment that Superman comes back as himself, not as I don't know where I am. I'm like a baby deer. I don't know who I am or where I am. But the first moment of him coming back is him keeping Cyborg from getting sliced and diced. And I was just going, oh, he hasn't been there to bond with the team, but he is part of the team. And I just get so excited and emotional where, because you think, oh no, like Cyborg's about to get yeet.
It's about to be it. Yeah. And, it's moments like that, and especially like the unexpected ones, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. Like the idea that, the league fails the first time around, right? We can't get it together. Barry's not able to deliver the charge, and, the world ends in a sense, right? Like that, I think will always just be like a moment where I go, I watched Superman get exploded on like live, right? Or reanimated rather, right? The idea that Superman was destroyed in this crazy way by this explosion, like that's powerful stuff. These moments that you don't expect. Flash, even though like folks may have known like he was going to use the Speed Force at some point and like run things back a little bit, the execution of it and what you feel the first time you watch it, right? And the level of
the emotional payoff.
It's just wow. This is like masterfully created, this film. And for all of this stuff, well, not say all, but for most of this stuff to have been 5-year-old footage, like it's crazy. It does make you think, well, what or how would it have been received in 2017? But, I'm of the mindset where I'm like, this is the appropriate thing for right now, right? Yeah. This is what people need, this thing right now. And, I hope people continue to enjoy it. They got the Justice's Gray version out, right? Yeah. As well. So I'm looking forward to continuing to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I was completely unprepared for how emotionally invested I was going to get in Barry, because my whole, like Ezra, everybody knows Ezra is hilarious. So I knew he was going to make me laugh. But like, I did not expect to just get so emotional over this character. Like when he gets injured and he doesn't tell the team.
Yeah, just like his voice shakes,
and he like won't even. He doesn't even tell them that he hurt. Because you know what it is? My headcanon. I'm like, you know what? This kid has been rejected his entire life. He's clearly socially awkward. So he's afraid that if he tells them that he's injured, that he's going to get kicked off the team. And then I like wanted to go curl up into a ball and cry because I have feelings.
Well, and the thing is, like, he probably doesn't want to alarm them unnecessarily, right? Because he's like, the fate of the world literally rests on this. And at the end of the day, that feeling of, I think it taps into this idea, this feeling of being like, of a feeling like, a failure in certain ways, right? Because ultimately, even what Barry is talking about with his father, right? His father's like, hey, don't come and see me. I'm a loser. I'm going nowhere. You're just sitting around hanging out with this old dude that isn't doing anything for anybody. I'm a drag on your life, right? And so that kind of stuff, for me, what's so tragic about it, it's like some of that can be hereditary, right? Those ideas. And if Barry's felt awkward or out of place or maybe has felt like a failure himself in certain ways, and not being able to acquire a great job to be able to, pursue the criminal justice stuff or whatever. Like, this would just be this instant right here, this messing up. Well, it's not even him messing up. He got shot by a parademon, but like, if he perceives that as a failure on his part, and he's someone who's always like bumbling or failing, right? Because we have other instances where like he trips in the tunnel when he's giving Wonder Woman the sword. Superman, hits him with the Olay, right? And Aquaman, and he runs into Aquaman, right? It's like that sort of like that idea that he's talking to himself at the end. And he's like, your dad, Dad, your kid was one of them, the best of the best. Like I did something with my life, even if it was just this one thing. I did it. It hits so many levels, man. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really wasn't. No. It's totally fine.
That feeling of inadequacy, I think, is the more appropriate, I guess, the more appropriate definition, right? Yeah, especially seeing like his story and his father's situation and just where they come from. Because Barry, for everything that Victor's done, look at what Barry could do, but chooses not to. He could run into a bank real quick, grab all the money, and be like, "Hey, I'm gonna hire a lawyer for my dad, get him out of jail," right? He doesn't do that.
Yeah, well, that's a parallel that your characters both have. Of like, if we wanted to be robbers, we could be very good robbers.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's like, no, he tries to go about it the right way because of who he is as a person, right? And that's, that speaks volumes. And I think that actually might be more of the true power of these characters, right? Is who they actually are and who they will allow themselves to become, more so than like the actual power itself, right?
Yeah. It feels like if someone hasn't already written it, somebody should write kind of like oh my God, what was the episode called? There's a Star Trek original series episode where it's like people come from, I think it's the Mirrorverse, and it's basically like an evil, evil alter ego version of yourself that you're meeting and is causing problems for yourself. I think it would be so funny if there was like the version that we know and love of Barry and Victor, and then if they have to encounter like evil versions of themselves that are bank robbers. Yeah, no,
that would be, I'd pay to see that.
Yeah, it would just be so interesting as well. Like, if it's whether it's in the comics of just playing around with the characters, or if it was something that was in live action, then whomever is playing the characters, then you get to basically Tatiana Maslany that thing where you're playing like a bunch of different versions of yourself. So
that would be pretty dope. Flashpoint, the idea of Flashpoint and everything kind of being reversed in certain ways. It's not like an exact opposite, but like just having the alternate universe of things, that kind of trope being used in TV and film and comics and all that has always been really fun to me, right? It's like, oh, well, let me see what you can come up with when you've got Ultraman instead of Superman, right? Or whatever it ends up being. Because I guess like the original inverse of Superman was Bizarro, right? And so that's a completely different take on it. But I'm a fan of that. I can dig it.
Yeah. Well, and right now, so you're working on a new upcoming series that is, wait, let me get this right. Co-executive produced by Will Smith and Jay-Z. Just want to name drop some big names in there. So it's called Women of the Movement. I know you've talked about this a lot on some of your other interviews, so I don't want you to have to repeat yourself. But I was trying to find angles of stuff that you haven't already overly explained with the premise and things like that. But you're playing Gene Mobley, and you're the third husband of Mamie, who will be played by the Tony Award-winning actress Adrienne Warren. So I couldn't remember if you had really talked specifically about working with her in some of your other interviews. So maybe that could be something new, since I know you've been hyping up this project on basically every interview that I saw of explaining the premise and all that.
I will continue to do so because of the importance of this project and of course the people who are telling the story, for sure. It almost feels like, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but it almost feels like energy-wise, working on this production feels very similar to the energy of what we had done for Justice League in 2016. Part of it is because, we're telling a story that number one, needs to be told, but it's more so about the folks who are in charge, right? People who are, behind the camera, our directors, our showrunner, obviously our producers, and this sort of coming together for a story that is greater than ourselves, right? On the Justice League side, it was like, all right, well, we're telling this story about characters that are larger than life, and it's ultimately, hopefully, going to be inspiring to people and children, and and maybe help folks to deal with some issues or concerns or questions that they may have in their own life. Okay. This feels similar, but you're dealing with these larger than life people who are actually real life people, right? Mm-hmm. And these people who were not at one point in time larger than life, but who essentially became larger than life through the struggles that they encountered. And so it's been a joy. It really has been. And, from what I understand, the episodes are coming in already, and they're finishing up post-production on just about all of them at this point. But from what I understand, it's going to be a powerful story. And I've been having a blast. I will say Adrian has been great. Been able to work with Glenn Turman, Cedric Joe, who plays Emmett Till in this. He's actually in the new Space Jam film that's going to be coming out soon. And just finding that connective tissue. This is far and away the blackest production I've ever been a part of, right? Insofar as representation, insofar as, who's running it. And, I say this just about in every interview, but I'd never worked with a black director in TV film before. And I'd never worked with a female director in TV film. And so to be able to get both of those experiences and to have them multiple times, because every single person directing is a black woman, right? For this anthology series. It's been really special. And that energy, you can just feel it every time you walk on the set, right? So yeah, Adrian's great, consummate professional. I mean, fierce. She literally gets in, she gets it done. Probably one of the busiest people that I've probably encountered, but in a good way, if that makes any sense. Just staying active. You can tell she cares very deeply about the work. You can tell she cares very deeply about issues outside of the work, right? Activism and social justice. And it almost feels like these days we as actors and human beings in general are having to wear so many different hats and are having to, it's almost unavoidable that we end up coming into contact with, issues that we wouldn't necessarily have information on outside of having our phones to be able to tell us about the issues happening in the world, but being able to split focus between doing your own work and also trying to push for greater change. It amazes me being able to watch people who can do that really effectively. For me, it's more of an ebb and flow. I try my best to find the balance. Sometimes you get a little too deep into one side, you get a little distracted. Sometimes, the other thing takes over. But I think we're at a place now where finding that balance of how to best engage with the issues of the world and also still be able to live your life and feel like you're not having to engage, right? If that makes any sense. Because there is this sort of anxiety that some people have about feeling like, oh, well, I've got to get active. I have to, because I feel like I'm failing society if I don't get involved. And for me, I'm like, do what you can with what you can. And sorry, I'm getting a little tangential now, but I'm like, do what you can with what you can. Take a little break, come back to it. Let somebody else pick up the torch. Let somebody else pick it up and hold it. And then when you're rested up, you come back into the fight. Yeah, I've got a little sidetracked. So,
no, but it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about it, because it seems really cool to have you acting with more Black talent, because you've been able to do that on all of these projects now. Even when you did True Detective with is it pronounced Mahershala? I was Googling this. I was really stressed about this.
I believe it's Mahershala. Folks, I think call him Hirsch sometimes, for sure. Yeah. No. And working with Mahershala was it was a master class, right? A master class, not only in acting, but a master class in grace and seeing how he operates and navigates a set. And, Carmen Ejogo, she and I got to talk a little bit, but we didn't get to work together in any scenes because I was playing the older version of her son.
Right.
But she was great. Stephen Dorff, obviously geeked out over Blade with Stephen Dorff. And Nick Pizzolatto, our showrunner, writer, and he directed some of the episodes as well. Like, he and I will still chat. Like, we'll have a call every month or so, or every little bit. And that was a really special production. I think being down in Arkansas, Fayetteville, Arkansas, that was my first time spending any extended time in the South. And just being able to see the difference and to like actually feel like the environment. We were in Fayetteville, which is, I think, more of a college town. I think it might be where Bill Clinton is from as well, but that's neither here nor there. All that to say, I had a good time. The heat of the summer down there was unlike anything I had ever felt before. And hopefully I'll never feel it's like again. I'd love to go back, but when the temperature is a bit more moderate, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and it was so interesting to see the two of you playing father and son, because of course you don't have that large of an age gap in real life, but they've aged him up with makeup, which was really well done, by the way. So it was just a trip to see. Yeah,
no, the way that they did those prosthetics for him and Steven, and they even did some for Carmen because they aged her up for certain scenes in different decades. But like that makeup effects team was like insane. And as real as it looks on camera, it looks that much more real, like when you're sitting right next to it. I was like, I literally would not recognize you on the street. Like, walk right past you and just be like, oh, hey, how's it going? I'm like, who are you? Right. And I joked with Mahershala. I was like, hey, listen, because I'd only saw him without the makeup like once prior to us filming True Detective. And so I told him at one point in production, I was like, I haven't seen you without this makeup except like one time in real life. I was like, I'm fairly certain I don't remember what you actually look like in person. Right. And anytime somebody says Mahershala's name, the first thing that pops into my mind is the old man version of Mahershala from True Detective, because that is the majority of, that's where I spent the majority of my time, like engaging with him. And so I got to be like, oh no, he's not 70 some odd years old. Okay. All right. Shake it out. But yeah, just an honor. It was such a good time.
It was so good to see how well he performed a character that's older, because I think sometimes when people get put into makeup like that, it's usually for comedy. So it's a little bit more like a caricature of an old person. Mm-hmm. But it was just such a subtle, nuanced performance. And I was going, wow, if I didn't know him and I just saw the old parts, I would just think that was just him,
Yeah. And it's a testament to him that he's not, trying to ham it up, being like, oh, I'm so old. I mean, the makeup, it does what it does. Right. And I'm sure I think he based a lot of, from what I understand, I think it was his grandfather that he based a lot of that sort of the sort of energy of older Wayne on. Mm-hmm. But don't quote me on that. You got to ask him. I think it was his grandfather, maybe his uncle. I can't remember. But we had a conversation about this, and I completely forgot. But like I said, it's just a masterclass. It was really, really, really impactful. And to be able to talk to another person who's for all intents and purposes a journeyman actor who's, obviously come into a crazy place when it comes to awards and all that other stuff, and having him come off of, winning the Academy Award for Moonlight and be just as gracious with the cast and crew of True Detective as anybody else was pretty good to see. So,
yeah. Well, and, with watching a thing like that, I was a little worried that I was going to get overwhelmed, because there's certain types of dramas that I just don't think I'm emotionally able to handle watching right now. But it was really good. And I didn't get too stressed out. So that's good. And you were great in it as well. It was such a trip seeing your facial hair. Oh,
I don't know if
that's what he looks like.
If I tried, right? Like my facial hair, like it will come in here and here, but over here and over here, it's just like, yeah, we're just gonna do whatever we want, bro. You just sit back and let us grow here. It was a really good time, and also it's another dynamic there of sort of an inability to communicate between father and son in that piece, right? And I was like, oh, what an interesting like parallel between those two things, right? It's just very interesting. I was like, the projects that definitely come into my life, I feel like are there for a very specific reason, and I'm proud to be able to, I guess, like explore what those reasons are. But super cathartic for sure.
So I don't have a nice segue for this, but is it true that you tested for The Force Awakens?
No. No, that's not true. There was a rumor that had come out in 2000 and what year was it? It was a long time ago now. Jeez.
2014?
2014 sounds right. Yes, correct. So we were in talks already for Cyborg with the Batman Superman of it all. And one day this article in Variety dropped saying, here's the top 5 actors, in contention for Force Awakens. And I'm like, I don't know how this is a thing, right? I had auditioned for an unknown project, right? One of those ones where you go into the casting office, they're like, sign your life away. Here's an NDA. Here's your script. Bring it back in a couple of days. We'll read it. And then we take your script from you. We don't even let you keep the pages, right? And you go, okay, cool. And as I'm reading the script, it's not even a full script. It's literally just like some sides. And I think that they're just kind of like dummy sides, which are just like, they kind of make up a scene in the vein of. And one of the first things that I saw on there was like, the blast doors open, blah, 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 blah. And
that's like, subtle.
I go, okay. And then, they tell me, they were like, well, we can tell you who's producing it. It's something in Lucasfilms. And I was like, okay.
Let me think about it.
Okay, blast doors. And, the jargon and whatever had seemed pretty like Star Wars-esque. And I was like, yeah, there ain't no way this is not Star Wars. So, you put a tape in and, that probably had thousands of actors, or hundreds of actors, like just do initial tapes. But the next thing I heard was this Variety article saying these are the top 5 people. And I'm like, that just can't be true because number one, I never tested for anything. I never met J.J. Abrams. Like there was no conversation beyond the tape that we had done maybe like 4 months before. So it was a nice, it's nice hype, I guess. But, that's kind of all it was to it. But,
okay.
But big shout out to John Boyega, obviously. Yeah. And, keep doing what you do, brother.
Yeah. Have you talked to him? Because I know that you two had a Twitter exchange that was public of basically it was something to the effect of, I think somebody had tweeted, John and Ray should talk to each other, like have a public conversation, maybe like a sit down, about your experiences with navigating the industry. And I guess both of you had tweeted something like, when we can, sure.
Yeah.
So,
and I said at the time, I said, well, when the investigation process is done, I'm down. So no, he and I haven't spoken directly, but it's nice to know that you got allies in the business and, it sucks that you may be going through similar experiences in certain ways. But it's also nice to know that you've got other folks who are willing to speak up and speak out about the situation. So another great recent ally of mine has been Leonard Roberts. And I don't know if you read about his experience working on Heroes.
Yes.
So Leonard and I actually had many hours of conversation just talking about the business and the experience. And, it's actually created a really nice space to be able to sort of just be able to share. Right. Because it's such a unique business and it's such a unique experience being a Black person in this business that, it can sometimes make you go, well, is it just me? Is it this? Is it that? And, you need to talk it out with folks to be like, yeah, no, that's objectively nonsense or that's objectively not OK. So and shout out to everybody else out there who's going and speaking up about the struggle. And, it's and sometimes I guess it can seem like a thankless sort of task, but ultimately, it will absolutely make all the difference for folks who are coming up later on down the line. So, I find myself amongst awesome company when it comes to that.
Yeah, and I know you also had some Twitter exchanges with Peter Shinkoda when he shared what he shared about what happened with Daredevil.
Yes. And he and I haven't spoken directly, just via Twitter, but there's a reckoning. There's a great reckoning coming, and I think, I think gone are those days where you could just do and say whatever you wanted and just go, well, they'll just have to take it because they don't have our version. These people don't have our version of power. And I think ultimately, one of the issues with some of the folks I was dealing with is that because they believe I didn't have their version of power, right? They believe that I would never be able to, they probably believe that I would never be able to speak up or have anything, to say or add to a conversation that could get some accountability, right? But the world is changing, and I want to give people the space to be able to change, with it. I don't think it's about, somebody put it the other day, they were like, it's not about cancel culture, it's about consequence culture, right? We've gone so long without any sort of consequence to this behavior, that, for certain folks who are the first ones who are facing consequences as a result of that behavior, it may feel like to them, like, yeah, this sucks. I'm just on the wrong end of this or that. This is the way the business has always been. Whatever the argument may be there, it's hard for me to gauge it or to judge it. But this sort of shift has been a long time coming, and so I welcome it, and I know other folks have, and that's why I keep trucking along and doing what I do, because at the end of the day, that encouragement, the personal encouragement from my friends and family, and the professional encouragement from my peers, and from folks that just having conversation with in general, we recognize it. It's just going to take folks to speak up for things to actually change, and very similarly to. I'm sure it's similar to other situations that people find themselves in, where you watch something go on like this, and you watch somebody say something and you go, ooh, I hope this sticks. I hope this may be the thing that finally, that shifts this thing, or that, brings awareness to a specific person's actions. And, we may say, okay, well, that person's doing it, so I don't have to. That person's speaking up, so I don't have to. And, what I want to encourage folks to do is, if you feel so inclined, don't sit on it. Don't sit on it, because I guarantee you, it will do more good, I think, universally than bad.
Well, that's what happened with Charisma, where she came out and she specifically said, "I'm coming out to support Ray because what Ray's saying, it completely lines up with my own experiences that are, several years older than what you went through." So, you can see, again, it's one of those things where, you don't have to get into specifics, but I will just say, from my perspective, it's astounding that anyone would try to claim that anything you're saying is wrong when everything you've said has been backed up by basically other people, so if it's about Joss specifically, now just this whole tidal wave of people came forward because you said what you said, and then Charisma said what she said, and then all these other women who worked on the show. And again, I'm not asking you to comment on that because that's their experiences. They've already made their statements. But and then also with you talking about your experiences with Jeff and something about, Cyborg's genitalia, and then Nadria, who we had on, and I spoke with her, and she shared her experiences of again, it was a recurring issue of, this is the same person that you dealt with doing the same thing of trying to claim themselves as the authority on stuff related to Black bodies. And I'm going, so why is everybody acting like Ray is just this one lonesome, loudmouth just making stuff up when it's backed up by other people? So it's
I think for some folks, because you have individuals who have long-standing careers and big fan bases, right? Joss Whedon has he's been in Hollywood a very long time, and he's got a massive fan base for the stuff that he does. Same thing with Jeff Johns. He has a massive fan base for the stuff that he does, and he's been around for a long time. I don't have the clout or the cachet for folks to know me as well as they may think they know these other individuals. And I think that sort of association, or lack of association, with me kind of could work against the credibility side of it. Ultimately, what I will say is I am super grateful to Charisma Carpenter. I'm super grateful to Nadria Tucker. I'm super grateful to Gal Gadot and anybody else who's publicly come out to say that they participated in the Justice League investigation. What I will say is that it is a shame that folks are having to speak up publicly about their participation and relay information that I'm sure that they would much rather get closure on and deal with on their own rather than having to put it out there publicly. But, it has certainly changed things. I'm grateful, even though, I don't know the cast and crew of Buffy or Angel or some of these other folks that Joss has worked with. But I'm grateful for those folks for backing up Charisma and standing with her on that. Ultimately, as I said before in a piece that I did with Forbes, this behavior is nothing new for a lot of these folks, and I'm glad that I could play a part in getting awareness out there and for hopefully folks to be able to heal and get some closure. But I'm just I could not have expected things to go in the way that they did when it came to that. So I'm grateful. I'm humbled, and that sort of response, that sort of thing, it inspires me to keep moving forward. And that's what we're going to do. that's really it. I think. Anyway, sorry.
In another, in the interviews that I was looking through that were a bit older, and you were talking more about doing theater because at the time that's what you were doing. You mentioned that you read a lot of plays, and it also said that you write plays. Is that something that you still do?
I do a little writing. There's a play that I wrote some time ago that I'm trying to dust off and do some renovation on, I guess, and some rewrites. It's funny taking some time away from, I don't know if you write or know people that write, but it's funny taking some time away from a piece and coming back to it and then seeing how your perspective has changed. It almost feels like looking at an old journal, right? And you're like, oh, I don't necessarily feel that way anymore. I don't necessarily think that thing anymore. I know why I wrote this in this way at that time because of what I may have been seeing or going through. But so I do a little bit of writing, but for the most part, I do a lot of talking. I do the talking, not the writing.
Well, it would be fun to see you, whenever the theaters are opening up again, or even, because you have a Twitch stream. If you do some sort of like Twitch theater, even if it's something more improv based, I think that would be really fun for you. How fun would that be? Yeah. Why not?
I could get down with that. I mean, sometimes when you're doing it live on Twitch, it gets a little, you may need to edit some things. It may get a little dicey if it's an improv deal, but I wouldn't be opposed to that. It's just be finding some folk. Do you do improv? Are you an improv person?
Well, it's funny because I've been following Rachel Zegler since longer than that. Rachel Zegler is the new Maria or Maria.
Okay.
And she guest starred on a Twitch talk show where at least two of the people that were on the panel were basically in character the entire time. One of them was playing, I think I had never watched this show before, so it was very confusing for me. I was like, who are these people? What are they doing? But they were basically in character the entire time. So it's just kind of more chaotic and comedic. It wasn't necessarily like what we're doing, where it's there's a little bit more formality to, okay, we're going to sit down, we're going to have an interview.
For sure.
But it was, so I was going, oh, that's interesting. I never thought about, especially because I don't really use Twitch. Literally, the first time I made Twitch was because you're always on Twitch. And I was like, I should see what Ray's up to and what he's doing. And then the first time I came on and I said, hi, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here. And you said hi to me on your stream. And, and it was about the Karen interview. But I was going to say, like, you could do Twitch theater.
You can do literally whatever. What's weird is I think theaters are trying to open back up, or do some sort of like open air theater for the fall. I'm not sure if they can't extend to Broadway, but I think some parks in New York are trying to figure out if they can do something socially distanced. And for me, it's like I'm chomping at the bit, especially given everything that's been going on with the TV film side of things, like to have sort of like a refreshing sort of like in-person experience, especially after COVID, right?
Right.
If possible. But, it's just that thing, you just have it in the back of your mind. You're like, all right, well, what I want versus what's best for the world right now they may be two different things. And, we got to make the sacrifice. So maybe a Twitch theater. Can you call it theater if it's technically on a screen?
Well, why not? What else are you it's the digital, it's the evolution of the medium. But I mean, yeah.
I could see that. I wouldn't be opposed to anything like that. I think Ray Porter and we could get together and do some fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you want a newcomer that always wanted to act but never was allowed to because she's Asian, you can just be like, do you want to do a bit part?
Was that you?
Oh, yeah. No. I always wanted to act. I did musicals in like middle school too. I was Lucy in You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. I had a whole lot of attitude and a little blue dress and like.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, listen, let me tell you, anything is possible. It's never too late. Clearly, I mean, you seem to be extremely personable. You got yourself grounded. You're grounded within yourself. So I'm sure you could go any which way you'd want to. And you never know. I mean, we may call you on. Me and Ray Porter may call you on for some improv.
Yes, I'm game. I'm totally game. I don't know what I'm doing, but that's also why I'm game. I'm like, what are we doing? I'll try it.
That would be the entertaining side of it. That would be the fun side of it. Okay. Don't be surprised if you end up getting an email like, hey, we know we talked about this thing loosely on LightCast.
No, I'm completely dead serious right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Done.
So just to wrap things up, are there any more kind of open-ended aspirations that you have for jobs you'd like to do or whatever? I know that a lot of what you've been pushing is more so, everything to do with the investigation, accountability over entertainment. But if we're talking about the artistic side of things, any other projects coming up or in an open-ended sense, like, oh, I'd love to be in the Star Wars universe or anything like that you want to leave off with?
I mean, Star Wars has always been like a really cool thing. I would want to be a Sith, though. I don't think I'm
really.
Jedi. Yeah, I don't want to try my hand at that. Just, Sith, they have a lot of fun. Those are the people that you can't. I mean, that's the balance of the Force, right? You can't really you can't praise the good guy without rooting against the evil Force. That and they have cooler lightsabers. The Jedi have the standard issue. Regular old lightsaber, and the Sith got the broadsword lightsaber. You got the double bow staff lightsaber. Like there was even like a dagger lightsaber kind of deal at one point, right?
Yeah, there's a whole lot.
They get a whole plethora of saber like weapons. Like I don't want to be just stuck with the standard sword saber. Mace Windu had the little what did he have? Well, he had the purple saber.
That's because Samuel L. Jackson was like, I want a purple lightsaber. And that wasn't even a thing until it was like, I want a purple lightsaber. And they went, Sam Jackson, you got to give him the purple lightsaber.
Iconic. And Count Dooku with the slightly curved lightsaber, the hilt of I'm like, I don't even know what that's about, but cool. Take it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, so maybe it has something to do, we're going to start getting the Star Wars theory. Maybe it has something to do with the idea that, that evil's always that the dark side is always evolving and changing and changing form and creating new ways to try to come at the. I don't know. We'll go ahead and we'll talk about it
next time.
Anyway, I want to say thank you to you, LadyJenevia, for having me. I am a big fan. I will continue to be a big fan. Thank you for being. Thank you for being you. That's it.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for spending so much time chatting with me. Clearly, I talk a lot.
Well, we're in the same boat. One of the big things that it was a constant sort of you remember like report cards from back in the day, how like teachers would like put little check marks in certain boxes, and they'd be like the standard boxes, like quiet or shy or so on and so forth. Mine, I kept getting check marks in talkative / disruptive, and also pleasure to have in class. Right. So could you imagine how like confusing of a thing for a kid to like read and be like, well, this one seems like a bad thing. The other one's kind of good. Do I keep doing what I'm doing? Like, and it's like, you can be both of those things. You can be, they're not mutually exclusive. And, the talkative nature is probably in some way, shape or form, like why it may have been a pleasure to have in class to the teacher. Cause, Yeah, I don't know. Now we're going back to kindergarten. Let's get out of kindergarten.